The crying did not stop for 91 nights. Not for money. Not for doctors. Not for the best nannies in the city. Inside a quiet mansion in Westchester, New York, Daniel Whitmore stood in the hallway at 2:17 a.m., his shirt wrinkled, his eyes red, listening to the sound that had broken him, piece by piece, 4 newborn babies screaming at once. His quadruplets were only 3 months old, but they had already turned his life into a storm. Every night the same nightmare returned. One baby cried, then another, then all 4 together, their tiny fists shaking in the dim nursery light. Daniel had hired women with years of experience. He had paid double, then triple. One by one they quit. Some left with apologies. One left in the middle of the night. The doctors found nothing wrong. No fever. No illness. No answer. But Daniel knew something was wrong. His sons and daughters were healthy, yet they sounded heartbroken. And deep down, he knew the reason had a name. Emily. Their mother was gone. Still, Daniel refused to say her name in that house. He buried the grief under schedules, bottles, monitors, and expensive advice. But grief does not disappear because a man is rich. It waits. It cries. And in that house it cried through 4 tiny voices until the night, a quiet housekeeper named Grace Miller stepped through the door and did what no expert had been brave enough to do. By sunrise the mansion looked peaceful from the outside. That was the cruel part. The white shutters were clean. The lawn was trimmed. The long driveway curved past maple trees glowing gold in the early morning light. From the street, anyone would have thought Daniel Whitmore had everything a man could want. Money. A beautiful home. 4 healthy babies. But inside that house the walls carried a sound no one could see. Crying. It lived in the nursery. It echoed down the hallway. It followed Daniel into the kitchen, into the study, into the shower, into the rare minutes when he closed his eyes and prayed for silence. For 3 months the crying had ruled the house. Not gentle crying. Not the soft whimpering of newborns asking for a bottle or a blanket. This was different. It came in waves. Sharp. Raw. Desperate. At first, Daniel told himself it was normal. Babies cried. Newborns needed time. Quadruplets were harder than 1 child, harder than 2, harder than anything he had ever imagined. So he bought more bottles, more warmers, more monitors, more blankets. He hired consultants who spoke in calm voices and carried leather folders full of sleep plans. Nothing worked. At 11:00 p.m., 1 baby would start. Usually little Noah, the smallest of the 4, his face turning red as his hands opened and closed in the air. Then Lily would answer him from the next crib, her tiny body stiffening as if some invisible ache had reached inside her chest. Then Caleb. Then Rose. Within minutes all 4 were crying together, their voices rising under the soft glow of the nightlight, while Daniel stood in the doorway feeling like the richest failure in America. He would move from crib to crib whispering, "Daddy's here. Daddy's here." But his voice sounded strange even to himself. Flat. Tired. Afraid. He would lift 1 baby then another, trying to hold 2 at once while the other 2 screamed harder. He would warm milk with shaking hands. He would check diapers that were already clean. He would call the night nurse. He would check the room temperature. 72 degrees. Always perfect. Perfect room, perfect bottles, perfect medical reports. And still nothing was right. By the 4th week, Daniel stopped sleeping in his bedroom. The bed was too big without Emily. The silence on her side of the mattress was worse than the crying. So he slept in a chair near the nursery, if sleeping could even be called that. His head would drop forward for 10 minutes, maybe 15, before another cry cut through the dark and snapped him awake like a gunshot. Some nights he woke already standing. Some nights, he found himself in the hallway with no memory of getting there. The housekeeper, Mrs. Helen Parker, would arrive at 7:00 each morning and find coffee untouched on the kitchen counter, bottles lined up like evidence, burp cloths draped over chairs, and Daniel standing barefoot in yesterday's clothes. "Mr. Whitmore," she said once gently, "you need rest." He gave a tired smile. "I'll rest when they do." But they didn't. And neither did he. The exhaustion began to change him. At work, Daniel was known as a man who could read a contract once and find the weakness no one else saw. He built companies. He closed deals. He spoke in boardrooms with the calm authority of a man who never lost control. But now control slipped through his fingers every morning. His assistant Mark Ellis watched him walk into meetings with mismatched socks and a blank stare. Daniel forgot names he had known for years. He signed the wrong page on a legal document. During one important call with investors, he stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence because for one terrifying second he could not remember what the meeting was about. The room went quiet. Mark leaned in and whispered, "Daniel." Daniel blinked. "I'm fine," he said. But nobody believed him. At lunch he sat alone in his office with the blinds half closed. Outside the city moved as usual. Horns, sirens, people crossing streets with coffee in their hands. Life kept going careless and loud. Daniel stared at a photo on his desk. Emily holding her pregnant belly. Emily laughing because she said she looked like she was carrying a whole basketball team. Emily alive. His throat tightened. He turned the frame face down. Then his phone rang. It was the nanny. Again. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore." Daniel closed his eyes. In the background, he heard the babies screaming. All four. The sound punched through the phone and landed in his chest. "I'll pay you more," he said. "It's not the money. I'll double it. Sir. Triple." There was a pause. Then the woman began to cry. "I haven't slept in 4 nights. I'm scared I'll make a mistake. They don't want me. They don't want any of us." Daniel gripped the edge of his desk. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," she whispered. "It's like they're waiting for someone who isn't coming." The line went silent. Daniel did not move. Not for several seconds. Then he hung up, stood, and walked out of the office without telling anyone where he was going. The drive home took 40 minutes. He made it in 28. When he pushed open the front door, the crying was already there to meet him. It rolled down the staircase and filled the foyer. Mrs. Parker stood near the banister with a laundry basket pressed against her hip, her face pale with worry. "She left, sir," she said softly. "The nanny? She packed her things?" Daniel nodded as if he had expected it. But something inside him dropped. He climbed the stairs slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. At the nursery door he stopped. 4 cribs, 4 tiny bodies, 4 red faces twisted in pain no doctor could measure. Noah kicked against his blanket. Lily's mouth opened in a silent scream before sound finally came. Caleb's little fists trembled. Rose had cried so hard her voice had gone hoarse. Daniel walked in and stood in the middle of the room. He did not pick them up right away. He couldn't. For the first time he was afraid to touch them. Afraid they would feel the emptiness in him. Afraid they would know. He had no idea how to be their father without their mother beside him. Then Noah's cry cracked into a weak broken sound. Daniel moved. He lifted him first, pressing the baby against his shoulder. Then he reached for Lily and held her against his chest with his other arm. Caleb and Rose cried from their cribs and the sound cut him open. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered. The words came out before he could stop them. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing." No one answered. No one could. The nursery light flickered softly against the walls. The mobile above the crib turned in slow circles, little stars and moons drifting over 4 children who had entered the world too soon and lost the one heartbeat they had known before they ever opened their eyes. Daniel had read the books. He knew babies heard voices in the womb. He knew they recognized their mother's rhythm, her breath, her warmth. But knowing something and facing it were not the same. Emily had carried them for months. They had heard her laugh. Her heartbeat. Her songs in the shower. Her quiet voice at night when she placed both hands on her stomach and whispered, "Hold on my little stars. Mommy's right here." Then one day she was gone. And everyone around them pretended they were too young to notice. Daniel had pretended most of all. He buried her name because saying it hurt too much. He removed her robe from the bathroom door. He packed away her slippers. He told the staff not to bring up sad things around the babies. "They need peace," he said. But what he really meant was, "I need to survive this day." So the house became clean. Organized. Quiet in all the wrong ways. No one spoke of Emily. No one sang her songs. No one touched the blue rocking chair where she had planned to feed them. And every night her children cried as if they were asking the same question over and over. Where did she go? Daniel sank into the rocking chair with 2 babies in his arms and 2 crying beside him. His head dropped back against the cushion. His eyes burned. His body shook from exhaustion. For a moment the powerful Daniel Whitmore disappeared. No businessman. No mansion owner. No man with lawyers, drivers and accounts full of money. Only a widower in a dark nursery. A father surrounded by 4 broken little hearts. And he could not fix them. That was the truth. He could buy anything except the one thing they wanted. He could hire anyone except the woman they missed. He could command a boardroom, but he could not command grief to leave his children alone. At 3:06 a.m., the crying finally softened, not because the babies were calm but because they were too tired to keep going. Their little sobs came in uneven breaths. Daniel stayed in the chair, afraid to move, afraid to wake them, afraid to be alone with his thoughts. Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck 3 times. The house settled. The rain began against the windows, light at first, then steady. Daniel looked toward the empty doorway and whispered the name he had not said aloud in weeks. Emily. His voice broke on the second syllable. Noah stirred against his chest. Lily's tiny hand opened and rested against his shirt. For one brief second the room held its breath. Then Caleb cried again. Rose followed. And the nightmare began all over. Daniel closed his eyes. Not because he was giving up. Because he was falling apart. And somewhere beyond that long terrible night help was already moving toward him. Not in a white coat. Not with a certificate. Not with a perfect resume. But with tired hands, a quiet voice, and a heart that understood what grief sounds like when it is too young to speak. The next morning, Daniel Whitmore made a decision that sounded reasonable to everyone except the 4 babies upstairs. He would hire the best. Not just a nanny. Not just help. The best. By 8:00 a.m., Mark Ellis had called 3 private childcare agencies in Manhattan, 2 in Connecticut, and 1 in Boston that specialized in high-need newborn care. By noon, Daniel's kitchen table was covered with resumes. Degrees. Certifications. References from governors, surgeons, hedge fund families, people who paid more for a nursery consultant than most Americans paid for a used car. Daniel stood over the papers with a cup of coffee he had not touched. Pick the strongest one, he said. Mark looked at him carefully. You sure you don't want to meet them first? Daniel's eyes stayed on the ceiling. Above them, Rose began crying. Then Noah. Then Lily. Then Caleb. All 4. Again. Daniel's jaw tightened. I don't need charming, he said. I need someone who can handle them. That afternoon, Patricia Monroe arrived. 56 years old. Calm eyes. Silver hair pulled into a neat bun. 24 years of newborn experience. Twins, triplets, premature babies, babies with colic, babies with reflux, babies who screamed until their parents begged God for morning. Patricia walked into the nursery like a woman entering a room she had already conquered 1,000 times. She washed her hands. Checked the bottles. Lowered the blinds. Listened to each cry. Then she turned to Daniel and gave him the first confident smile he had seen in weeks. Mr. Whitmore, she said, you go downstairs. I've got them. Those 3 words nearly broke him. I've got them. Daniel wanted to believe her so badly that he did not argue. He went downstairs. He sat in the study. He stared at the baby monitor beside his laptop like it was a bomb. For 20 minutes, Patricia moved with perfect rhythm. She lifted Noah, tucked him into her shoulder, swayed twice, shushed softly. Then she placed him down and picked up Lily. She dimmed the lamp. She warmed a bottle. She changed Caleb. She hummed a low hymn under her breath. At first, Daniel felt something dangerous. Hope. The crying softened. Not gone. But lower. For the first time in days, Daniel leaned back in his chair. Then Rose let out a sharp scream. Noah answered. Lily's face crumpled. Caleb twisted in his blanket. Within seconds, the nursery exploded. Patricia did not panic. Not then. She adjusted. She tried side-holding, rocking white noise, skin-to-skin warmth against her forearm. She checked for gas. She checked for tight clothing. She checked toes for little threads wrapped around them. She checked everything a professional checks when love has no instructions. Nothing worked. By midnight, Patricia's bun had loosened. By 2:00 a.m., she had stopped humming. By 4:30, Daniel found her standing in the hallway with Rose in her arms and tears running down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. Daniel froze. What do you mean? Patricia looked toward the nursery where the other 3 babies cried like they had been abandoned on the side of the world. I have never seen this, she said. Not like this. He took a step closer. They're babies. There has to be something. I know. Then do it. His voice came out sharper than he meant. Patricia did not flinch. That was worse. She only looked tired. I have tried everything I know. Daniel stared at her as if she had just betrayed him. You've been here 1 night. And I'm telling you the truth after 1 night, she said softly. They are not just uncomfortable. They are not just fussy. They are looking for something. Daniel's face hardened. They need sleep. No, Patricia said. They need someone. The words landed too close to the place he refused to touch. Daniel turned away. I'll double your fee. Mr. Whitmore. Triple it. She shifted Rose carefully into his arms. It isn't about money. He hated that sentence. Because for most of his life, money had been the one door that always opened. But Patricia Monroe left at sunrise. She placed a handwritten note on the kitchen island before she walked out. They are beautiful children. I'm sorry I could not be what they need. Daniel read it once. Then he folded it. Then he threw it in the trash. By evening, the second nanny arrived. Evelyn Brooks. 48. Former neonatal nurse. Direct, efficient, no nonsense. She did not smile much, and Daniel liked that. Smiles had begun to feel like lies. Evelyn reviewed the charts, the feeding times, the sleep logs, the hospital discharge papers. She asked clinical questions and made quick notes with a black pen. Too many people have been improvising, she said. Daniel nodded. Then don't improvise. I won't. For the first 3 hours Evelyn ran the nursery like a hospital unit. Bottles every 3 hours. Burping at specific intervals. Lights low. Sound machine at 45%. Swaddles tight but not too tight. No unnecessary touching. No overstimulation. Daniel watched from the doorway, arms crossed, trying to convince himself this was what the babies needed. Structure. Discipline. A system. But grief does not respect a system. At 1:12 a.m., Noah began to cry. Evelyn checked him, changed him, fed him, burped him. At 1:19 Lily joined. At 1:23 Caleb. At 1:26 Mintanelia Rosa. Evelyn's jaw set. Normal cluster crying, she said. But Daniel heard the doubt under her voice. At 2:00 she called the pediatrician. At 2:30 she changed the formula with Daniel's approval. At 3:00 she checked their temperatures for the third time. Normal. Everything normal. Nothing normal. By dawn, Evelyn was sitting on the floor with her back against the crib, her eyes fixed on nothing. The babies were still crying. Daniel stood in the doorway. Can you stay another night? Evelyn slowly shook her head. I shouldn't. Why? Because I'm starting to feel angry. That answer stunned him. She looked up at him ashamed but honest. I would never hurt them, never. But exhaustion does things to people. I know my limit, and this is it. She packed her bag before breakfast. No drama. No speeches. Just one more expert walking down the stairs while 4 tiny voices filled the house behind her. After Evelyn came Sandra Mills, who lasted 4 days. Sandra believed in singing. She sang old lullabies, soft country songs, nursery rhymes her own mother had taught her in Kentucky. She had a warm laugh and strong arms, and for a few hours Daniel thought maybe warmth was enough. On the 4th night he found her in the laundry room sitting on a basket of folded towels, pressing both hands over her ears. I can still hear them, she whispered, though the babies were upstairs. Even when I'm not in the room I hear them. Daniel said nothing. Sandra looked up. I'm sorry. I know you need help. Yes, he said. I do. I can't be it. She left before dawn. Then there was Megan Doyle, who came with sleep training charts and confidence. She lasted 2 nights. Then Ruth Kim, who specialized in premature infants. She lasted 5. Then 2 women together, rotating shifts. Daniel thought 2 professionals might do what one could not. By the end of the week both resigned. One left a note. The other left without saying goodbye. That one hurt more. Not because Daniel blamed her. Because he understood. The house had become a place people escaped from. Every departure made the silence afterward heavier. Not peaceful silence, failed silence. The kind that came between waves of crying and reminded Daniel that another person had looked at his life up close and decided they could not survive it. And each time someone quit, Daniel became more convinced of one terrible thing. Maybe the problem was not the babies. Maybe it was him. Maybe they felt the fear in his hands. Maybe they heard the emptiness in his voice. Maybe every time he picked them up they knew he was not the parent they were reaching for. One night after the 6th nanny left, Daniel stood alone in the nursery. All 4 babies were awake. All 4 were crying. He did not reach for the monitor. He did not call an agency. He did not offer anyone more money. He just stood there under the pale yellow light and whispered, "What do you want from me?" Noah cried harder. Lily turned her face toward the empty blue rocking chair. The chair Emily had chosen. The chair no one used. Daniel followed his daughter's tiny gaze. For a second the room seemed to tilt. He saw Emily there as clearly as if memory had opened a door. Barefoot. Tired. Smiling. One hand on her swollen belly telling him they would figure it out together. Together. Daniel gripped the crib rail until his knuckles went white. But there was no together anymore. There was only him. Him and 4 babies every expert had failed to calm. Outside the wind pressed rain against the windows. Inside the crying rose again. And Daniel Whitmore, a man who had built an empire by finding solutions, finally understood that this was not a problem money could solve. Still, he did not yet know what kind of answer was coming. He did not know that in less than 2 weeks a quiet woman with tired eyes and a black and white uniform would say one sentence at a crowded charity event. One sentence that would stay in his head like a match struck in the dark. Sometimes it is not about technique. Sometimes it is about true presence. Daniel Whitmore did what desperate fathers do when love is not enough. He went looking for answers. Not on parenting blogs. Not in late-night forums. Not from strangers telling him to swaddle tighter, dim the lights, warm the bottle, change the formula, play ocean sounds, play heartbeat sounds. Stop picking them up, pick them up faster. He had tried all of that. Now he wanted science. At 7:15 on a Monday morning after another night without sleep, Daniel carried all 4 babies into a private medical center in Manhattan with Mrs. Helen Parker walking beside him and Mark Ellis pushing a stroller packed like they were leaving the country. 4 diaper bags. 8 bottles. 2 blankets for each baby. A folder thick with sleep logs, feeding records, temperature charts and notes Daniel had written at 3:00 a.m., in handwriting so uneven it barely looked like his own. Noah cried in the first carrier. Lily whimpered in the second. Caleb stared at the ceiling lights with red exhausted eyes. Rose had no voice left. She opened her mouth but only a tiny rasp came out. That sound frightened Daniel more than the screaming. The waiting room went quiet when they entered. A mother holding one toddler looked up, saw the 4 carriers, then saw Daniel's face and quickly looked away. A nurse behind the desk softened her voice. Mr. Whitmore. Daniel nodded. We're ready for you. Ready? The word felt almost cruel. No one was ready for this. They were placed in a large examination room with pale blue walls and a rocking chair in the corner. The chair was meant to comfort parents. Daniel did not sit in it. He stood. He had been standing for months. The pediatric sleep specialist Dr. Samuel Keene arrived with a tablet in one hand and kind eyes that had probably comforted hundreds of frightened parents. Daniel hated those eyes immediately. Not because they were unkind. Because they looked patient. And patience was the one thing Daniel had almost none of left. Dr. Keene examined each baby carefully. He listened to their hearts. Checked their reflexes. Looked into their ears. Pressed gently on their bellies. Asked about feeding, digestion, sleep cycles, birth history, weight gain, medications, formula, room temperature, noise, light, and routine. Daniel answered every question fast. Too fast. Like a man defending himself in court. They eat every 3 hours. 72 degrees. No fever. No rash. No vomiting. Yes, they were early. No, the crying is not normal. The doctor looked up. I didn't say it was. Daniel stopped. His jaw flexed. Then tell me what it is? Dr. Keene did not answer right away. He turned back to Rose, who was curled in Helen's arms, too tired even to fuss. The doctor placed 2 fingers gently against her tiny wrist and counted her pulse. Daniel watched every movement. Every blink. Every breath. He wanted the man to find something. That was the secret shame of it. He wanted a diagnosis. A name. A medical word with sharp edges and a treatment plan attached to it. Because if there was a name, there was a path. If there was a path, Daniel could walk it. He could pay for it. He could manage it. He could fix it. But after the first exam came the second. After the second came the blood work. After the blood work came imaging. Then another specialist. Then another waiting room. Then another hallway where Daniel paced under fluorescent lights while the babies cried in rotating waves, one starting as another faded like pain passing a torch. A nurse offered him coffee. He took it. He forgot to drink it. By noon they had seen a pediatric gastroenterologist. By 2 a neurologist. By 4 a feeding specialist. By 5:30 Daniel was sitting in a consultation room with 4 sleeping babies, at last not peacefully but from exhaustion, their small faces blotchy and damp from crying. Dr. Keene returned with the results. Daniel stood before the doctor even spoke. What is it? Dr. Keene looked at the chart. Then at Daniel. Medically they look good. The room went silent. Daniel stared at him. No. The doctor's expression did not change. Their weight gain is within an acceptable range. Their oxygen levels are good. Their neurological responses are normal. No sign of infection. No sign of acute gastrointestinal distress. No evidence of seizures. No structural issue we can see. Daniel shook his head slowly. You missed something. I don't think we did. You missed something. His voice was lower now. Dangerous. Mark shifted near the wall, but he did not interrupt. Dr. Keene set the tablet down. Mr. Whitmore, I understand how hard this has been. No, you don't. The words snapped through the room. Lily stirred in her carrier. Daniel lowered his voice, but his hands were shaking. You go home tonight? You sleep? You wake up and tell another parent their child is fine. I go home to 4 babies who scream until their throats give out. So don't tell me you understand. Dr. Keene let the anger pass through the room without catching it. That made Daniel even angrier. I'm not saying nothing is happening, the doctor said. I'm saying I don't see a medical emergency. Then what do you see? The doctor looked toward the babies. I see 4 premature infants who experienced a traumatic beginning. I see a household under extreme stress. I see a father who is grieving and exhausted. And I see children who may be reacting to more than hunger or discomfort. Daniel's face closed. Reacting to what? Dr. Keene paused. To absence. There it was again. The word no one could stop circling. Absence. Daniel looked away first. Outside, the window traffic slid down the avenue in silver streaks. People were going home. People were buying groceries. People were making dinner. Ordinary life moving forward like it had not left him behind. Dr. Keene continued gently. Babies are not blank pages, Mr. Whitmore. They know voices, smells, heartbeats, patterns. They may not understand death, but they understand loss in the body. They understand when the person they expected is not there. Daniel's throat tightened. Are you saying they're crying because their mother died? I'm saying grief can live in a house even when no one says its name. Daniel turned back sharply. That is not a diagnosis. No, Dr. Keene said. It isn't. Then it doesn't help me. It might. Daniel laughed once cold and empty. How? Stop treating every cry like a problem to silence. Start asking what they are trying to express. Daniel looked at him like the man had just handed him smoke. They're 3 months old. Yes. They can't express anything. Dr. Keene's voice stayed calm. They have been expressing it every night. For a moment Daniel could not speak. Because deep down under the money and the anger and the sleepless rage, something in him knew the doctor was right. He just did not know what to do with it. And Daniel Whitmore hated problems he could not turn into instructions. So he asked for more tests. A second opinion. Then a third. Over the next 10 days, the babies were taken to 2 hospitals and 1 private clinic. Daniel requested scans, evaluations, sleep studies, allergy tests, consults with specialists whose calendars were booked for months until his name made room. The answer never changed. Healthy, sensitive, premature. Give it time. Build routine. Be patient. Patient. That word began to feel like an insult. Because patience did not stand in the nursery at 2:00 a.m., holding a baby whose voice had cracked from crying. Patience did not sit through investor calls while hearing phantom screams behind every sentence. Patience did not walk past Emily's untouched blue rocking chair and feel the air leave the room. One afternoon after the final consultation, Daniel stood in the hospital parking garage beside the black SUV while Helen buckled the babies into their seats. The garage smelled like concrete, rainwater, and exhaust. Noah was crying again. Caleb followed. Then Rose. Then Lily. Helen moved gently, whispering, "It's all right, sweetheart, it's all right." But it was not all right. Daniel held the medical folder under one arm. Every page inside said the same thing in different language. Normal. Normal. Normal? He wanted to throw it across the garage. Instead, he pressed his hand against the roof of the SUV and bowed his head. Mark stood a few feet away. "Daniel," he said quietly, "maybe you should take a few days away from the office." Daniel did not look up. "And do what?" "Rest." The laugh that came out of Daniel barely sounded human. "Rest where, Mark?" "In the house where they scream, in the bedroom where her side of the bed is empty, in the nursery where every professional in New York has failed." Mark said nothing. Daniel finally looked at him. His eyes were bloodshot, his face thinner than it had been a month ago. His suit hung loose at the shoulders. "I have 4 healthy babies," Daniel said. "That's what every doctor keeps telling me." His voice cracked. "So why does it feel like they're dying from something nobody can see?" The question hung between them. No one answered. No one could. That night Daniel brought the babies home with no medicine, no diagnosis, no plan that had not already failed. The mansion was warm. The bottles were ready. The nursery was clean. The monitors glowed. Everything looked perfect. And within 20 minutes the crying began again. Daniel stood at the bottom of the stairs and listened. For the first time he did not run up immediately. He just listened. Not to the volume. Not to the panic. To the ache underneath it. 4 tiny voices calling into a house where one name had been locked away. "Emily?" Daniel closed his eyes. His hand tightened on the banister. The doctors had told him his children were healthy. But no one had told him how to heal a baby's broken heart. And no one had told him how to heal his own. By the end of the 3rd month, Daniel Whitmore was not living anymore. He was functioning. Barely. Every morning began the same way. The sun came up behind the tall windows of the Westchester mansion, spilling soft gold across polished floors and expensive furniture. The house looked calm, elegant, almost peaceful. But Daniel knew better. Peace had left that house with Emily. At 6:12 a.m., after another night of broken crying and 10-minute naps, Daniel stood in the bathroom, staring at himself in the mirror. His eyes were red. His jaw was covered with 2 days of stubble. His white dress shirt hung open at the collar because his fingers had trembled too much to button it right. From down the hall, Noah whimpered. Daniel froze. Not because the sound was loud. Because his body had learned to fear even the smallest cry. He waited. 1 second. 2. 3. Then Lily joined. Then Caleb. Then Rose. The 4 voices rose together, thin and desperate, filling the morning before it had even begun. Daniel gripped the edge of the sink and lowered his head. No, he whispered. Not to the babies. To the day? To the world? To himself. He was supposed to be in Manhattan by 8:30 for a board meeting with investors from Chicago. A $72 million acquisition depended on that meeting. His company had spent 9 months preparing for it. Lawyers had worked through weekends. Analysts had built models down to the penny. Daniel had once lived for mornings like this. Big rooms. High pressure. Sharp decisions. A clean win. Now he could not remember where he had left his cufflinks. He walked into the closet and stood there for almost a full minute staring at rows of dark suits. Navy. Charcoal. Black. All perfectly pressed. All useless. Mrs. Helen Parker appeared at the bedroom door with Rose against her shoulder. Mr. Whitmore, she said gently, I can take them for a while. Daniel turned too quickly. Rose startled and cried harder. He softened his voice at once. I'm sorry. Helen looked at him with the tired kindness of someone who had watched him come apart piece by piece. You need to eat something. I'll eat at the office. You said that yesterday. I'm fine. Helen did not argue. But her eyes did. Daniel grabbed the wrong jacket from the hanger and did not notice until he was already downstairs. His driver Paul Bennett waited outside with the black SUV running. Mark Ellis was in the back seat, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear. The moment Daniel climbed in, Mark lowered the phone. You look awful. Daniel shut the door. Good morning to you too. I'm serious. So am I. Drive. Paul pulled away from the mansion. The gates opened. The house disappeared behind them, but the crying stayed inside Daniel's skull. It followed him down the highway. It sat beside him in the leather seat. It pulsed behind his eyes every time he blinked. Mark handed him a folder. Updated numbers. The Chicago group wants reassurance on projected cash flow after the merger. Daniel opened the folder. The lines blurred. He blinked harder. Numbers had always been simple for him. Honest. Cold. Reliable. Numbers did not cry. Numbers did not ask where their mother had gone. Numbers did not look at him with Emily's eyes. Daniel. He looked up. What? Cash flow. Page 3. Daniel looked down. He was on page 7. Right. Mark watched him. Did you sleep at all? Daniel closed the folder. Do not ask me that again. The rest of the ride went quiet. At the office, people moved differently around him now. Softer. Careful. Like employees walking past a cracked window they feared might shatter if they breathed too hard. The receptionist smiled too brightly. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. He did not answer. Not because he meant to be rude. Because he had not heard her. In the elevator, his reflection stared back from the polished doors. Expensive suit, empty eyes. A man still dressed like success while failure lived under his skin. The boardroom was already full when he walked in. 12 people turned toward him. Investors? Lawyers. Senior executives. His own partner Robert Langford sat near the head of the table with a tablet in front of him and a warning in his face. Daniel took his seat. Let's begin? For the first 20 minutes he managed. He nodded at the right times. Asked 2 sharp questions. Corrected 1 legal phrase that everyone else had missed. For a moment the old Daniel appeared. Controlled. Precise. Dangerous. Then someone mentioned risk exposure in quarter 4. Daniel heard the words. But beneath them another sound rose. A baby crying. Not in the room. In his head. Then another. Then 4. His fingers tightened around his pen. The analyst across the table kept speaking. Assuming integration costs remain under 8%, we believe. Daniel interrupted. That's wrong. The analyst froze. Robert turned slightly. What's wrong? Daniel looked at the spreadsheet projected on the screen. His eyes moved across the numbers. Nothing made sense. The room waited. Daniel's mouth went dry. He had challenged the figure by instinct, by old habit, by the memory of being the smartest man at the table. But now he could not find the error. Because there was no error. The silence stretched. Robert stepped in smoothly. Daniel means the assumption may be too optimistic under a delayed integration schedule. The analyst nodded too quickly. Yes. Of course. The meeting continued. But everyone had seen it. Daniel had missed. Not by much. But enough. At 1143 his phone buzzed on the table. Home? He stared at the screen. The word looked like a threat. He declined the call. It rang again. He declined again. Then a text from Helen appeared. They won't settle. I'm sorry. I thought you should know. Daniel's throat closed. He pushed back from the table. I need 5 minutes. Robert's eyes followed him as he walked out. Daniel made it to his office, shut the door and stood in the middle of the room without moving. The city stretched outside the windows. Manhattan shone in hard daylight. Glass towers. Yellow taxis. People living lives that still had rhythm. His phone rang again. This time he answered. The crying poured through before Helen said a word. All 4 babies. Screaming. Daniel pressed the phone against his ear and closed his eyes. Helen's voice shook. I'm sorry, sir. I fed them. Changed them. I tried the swing. I tried holding Noah and Lily together, but Caleb wakes Rose, and then, I know. I don't know what else to do. Neither did he. That was the truth. The words were right there. I don't know either. But he was Daniel Whitmore. He was the man people called when things collapsed. He was not supposed to say he had no answer. So instead he said, call the agency again. They already said no one is available today. Then call another agency. I did. Then call all of them. His voice rose. On the other end, Helen went silent. Daniel heard himself breathing. Too hard. Too angry. He lowered his voice. I'm sorry. Helen answered softly. I know. That made it worse. After the call ended, Daniel sat at his desk and opened his laptop. There were 47 unread emails, 3 marked urgent, 2 from attorneys. 1 from Robert with the subject line, we need to talk. Daniel opened none of them. Instead, he clicked on a video file saved in a folder he had not touched since Emily died. The screen filled with shaky phone footage. Emily in the nursery before the babies were born. The blue rocking chair behind her. Her hands on her stomach. She was laughing. Daniel stopped recording. I look enormous. Behind the camera, his own voice said, you look beautiful. She rolled her eyes. I look like I swallowed a beach ball. You look like you're carrying 4 beach balls. She threw a baby sock at him. The sock flew toward the camera. The video shook as he laughed. Then Emily leaned closer to the lens and whispered, for the record, little stars, your daddy thinks he's funny. He is not. Daniel stopped breathing. Little stars. That was what she called them. He had forgotten. No. He had buried it. A knock came at the door. Daniel slammed the laptop shut. Robert walked in anyway. He closed the door behind him. For several seconds neither man spoke. Robert had known Daniel for 16 years. They had built the company together from 1 floor of rented office space and a borrowed conference table. He was not sentimental. He was not soft. That was why Daniel trusted him. So when Robert spoke gently, Daniel knew it was serious. You need to step back. Daniel's face hardened. No. You're exhausted. I said no. You're making mistakes. 1 correction in a meeting is not a collapse. It's not 1 correction. Daniel stood. Careful. Robert did not move. Last week you approved the wrong vendor contract. Yesterday you missed a call with the pension fund. This morning you challenged a number that was accurate. People are noticing. Daniel laughed under his breath. Let them notice. The company is feeling it. There it was. The sentence Daniel had been waiting for. Not concern. Not sympathy. Consequence. His eyes went cold. My wife died, Robert. Robert's expression tightened. I know. Do you? Yes. No. You don't. You go home at night. Robert absorbed that. Daniel kept going because pain had found a target now. You go home to a quiet house. You sleep next to your wife. You wake up and come here with advice about leadership and optics. I'm not talking about optics. You just said people are noticing. I'm talking about survival, Robert said, his voice finally sharpening. Yours. The company's. Those children's. Daniel stopped. Robert stepped closer. You cannot keep pretending you are still the same man you were before Emily died. The room went still. Daniel's hand curled into a fist at his side. Robert's voice dropped. You're not. And that does not make you weak. But pretending is going to break everything she left you. That hit? Harder than anger. Harder than accusation. Daniel looked toward the window. Far below, traffic moved in thin streams of red and yellow. He wanted to throw Robert out. He wanted to shout. He wanted to say something cruel enough to make the room safe again. Instead, his phone buzzed. Another message from Helen. Noah has a fever of 99.8, probably from crying. I'm watching him. 99.8 was not dangerous. Daniel knew that. But his body reacted as if the world had caught fire. He grabbed his keys. Robert watched him. Go home. Daniel was already at the door. As he walked through the office, conversations stopped. People looked down at screens. Assistants stepped aside. No one blocked him. In the elevator, he saw his reflection again. This time he did not see a businessman. He saw a man running from one burning room to another. When he reached home, the crying met him before the front door fully opened. Daniel dropped his briefcase in the foyer. Papers spilled across the marble floor. He did not pick them up. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time. In the nursery, Helen held Noah, Mrs. Parker's face pale with exhaustion. Lily and Rose cried in their cribs. Caleb kicked under his blanket, his little mouth open wide, sound tearing out of him. Daniel crossed the room and took Noah. The baby's forehead was warm. Not dangerously hot, but warm. Daniel pressed his lips against it and felt something inside him crack. "I'm here," he whispered. Noah cried harder. Daniel's eyes filled. "I'm here." Still the baby cried. That was the part that destroyed him. He was there. He was trying. He was giving everything he had left. And still it was not enough. By midnight the house was dark except for the nursery lamp. Daniel sat on the floor with his back against the crib tie, loosened sleeves rolled, Noah against his chest, Lily in the crook of his arm. Helen had finally fallen asleep in the hallway chair. Caleb and Rose whimpered in short, broken bursts. Daniel looked at the four tiny faces and understood the truth. He had been out running. His life was not beginning to fall apart. It already had. The company, the house, his body, his mind, his children. All of it was cracking under a grief no one had taught him how to carry. And somewhere in that terrible quiet between cries, Daniel whispered the only honest prayer he had left. "Emily, I can't do this alone." No answer came. Only rain against the window. Only four babies breathing unevenly in the dark. But the prayer had been spoken. And once a desperate man finally admits he needs help, the door to help can begin to open. 15 days before Daniel Whitmore would stand hidden in his own hallway and see the impossible, he attended a charity event he did not want to attend. He almost canceled. 3 times. At 5:30 that evening, he stood in his bedroom wearing a black tuxedo with a bow tie hanging loose around his neck. The mirror showed him a man dressed for celebration and built for collapse. His cheeks looked hollow, his eyes looked bruised. His hair, once always controlled, fell slightly out of place near his temple. From the nursery down the hall, Caleb cried. Then Rose. Daniel closed his eyes. Not again. Helen Parker appeared at the bedroom door holding Noah against her shoulder. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, "you should go." He turned toward her. "I shouldn't. You promised the foundation. They'll survive without me." Helen looked at him for a long second. Then she said the one thing he could not dismiss. "Maybe you need one room tonight where no one is crying." Daniel looked past her toward the hallway. Lily let out a thin, tired wail. His face tightened. "I'll be back early." Helen nodded. "I know." He picked up his phone, checked the baby monitor one more time, then another. 4 cribs. 4 tiny bodies. 3 moving. 1 still for the moment. He stared until Noah shifted against Helen's shoulder and gave a small broken sound. Daniel turned away before it pulled him back. The event was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel in Manhattan in a ballroom with crystal chandeliers, white roses, and round tables dressed in linen so crisp they looked untouched by human hands. The charity raised money for families with premature infants, which was why Daniel had agreed months earlier, back when Emily was still alive, back when they believed their own miracle was only beginning. Now the banner over the stage felt like a hand around his throat. A night for new beginnings. Daniel almost laughed when he saw it. New beginnings. He had 4 new beginnings at home, and every one of them cried like the world had already disappointed them. The ballroom was full of noise. Forks against plates. Champagne glasses touching. Men in dark suits talking about markets and real estate. Women in silk dresses leaning close over candlelit tables. A string quartet played near the far wall, elegant and soft, almost too beautiful for a room where people were writing checks to feel generous. Daniel walked through it like a ghost. People noticed him immediately. They always did. "Daniel, good to see you. So sorry again about Emily. You're incredibly strong. Those babies are lucky to have you." Each sentence landed like a small stone. He nodded. Thanked them. Accepted their careful sympathy. But inside he felt nothing except the pull of home and the sound of crying that was not even there. Robert Langford met him near the bar. "You made it." Daniel glanced around. "Barely." Robert studied him. "Do you want to leave?" "Yes." "Are you going to?" "No." Robert gave a small nod. That was Daniel. Bleeding internally, still attending the dinner. A waiter passed with a tray of sparkling water and champagne. Daniel reached for water. His hand brushed another hand reaching for the same glass. "Excuse me," a woman said. Daniel turned. She was not one of the guests. That was clear immediately. She wore the hotel's black and white service uniform. White shirt. Black vest. Hair pulled back neatly. Comfortable shoes made for standing too many hours. She was perhaps in her early 40s, though tiredness and gentleness made her age hard to guess. Her name tag read, Grace Miller. She stepped back at once. "I'm sorry, sir." Daniel shook his head. "No, it was me. She gave a polite smile and continued moving the tray balanced on one hand with the quiet skill of someone who had learned not to take up too much space in rooms full of powerful people. Daniel watched her for half a second longer than he meant to. Not because she was beautiful in the polished way of the women in the ballroom. She wasn't polished. She was calm. That was what caught him. There was something steady in her face, something the room did not have. Around her, men laughed too loudly. Donors competed over generosity. Cameras flashed near the sponsor wall. But Grace moved through it all like a candle that did not flicker. Later during dinner, Daniel sat at the front table while a pediatric surgeon spoke about fragile infants and exhausted parents. A video played on the screen showing tiny babies in incubators, parents pressing hands to glass, nurses moving with sacred care. Daniel stared at the screen until it blurred. Emily had held his hand in a room like that. Not this ballroom. The hospital. The day the quadruplets were born, too early, too small, too quiet at first. He remembered the machines. The wires. Emily's pale face. Her whisper. Are they breathing? He remembered telling her yes. He remembered believing that was the hardest question he would ever answer. He was wrong. A burst of applause shook him back into the room. Everyone stood. Daniel stood too, a beat late. Robert noticed. So did Grace Miller. She was at the edge of the room collecting untouched salad plates, but her eyes rested on Daniel for one brief second. Not curious. Not pitying. Seeing. Daniel looked away first. After the speeches, the auction began. A weekend in Napa, a signed Yankees jersey. A private dinner with a celebrity chef. Numbers rose. Paddles lifted. People clapped for themselves. Daniel gave $50,000 without thinking. The host praised him from the stage. An extraordinary gift from Daniel Whitmore. The room applauded. Daniel felt sick. $50,000. Gone with one raised hand. And still he could not buy one full night of peace for his children. He stood and walked toward the side of the ballroom, needing air, needing quiet, needing 5 seconds where no one praised him for surviving a life they did not have to live. Near the service entrance, Robert followed. You okay? Daniel looked at him. That question again. Okay, fine. Strong? Words people used when they did not know what else to do. He gave a bitter half smile. I would pay any amount of money, Daniel said, his voice low, for someone to tell me how to make 4 babies sleep at the same time. He meant it as a confession. A joke. A breakdown disguised as a sentence. But someone heard him. Grace Miller had been passing behind them with a tray of coffee cups. She stopped. Just for a second. Daniel noticed. So did Robert. Grace looked as if she was deciding whether speaking would cost her something. Then she turned slightly. Sir, she said quietly, sometimes it isn't about technique or experience. Daniel's eyes lifted to hers. The noise of the ballroom seemed to pull back. Grace held the tray close, her fingers steady around the edge. Sometimes, she continued, it's about true presence. Robert's eyebrows moved faintly as if the comment were too personal for a hotel server to make. Daniel did not respond. He could not. Grace seemed to realize she had crossed an invisible line. She lowered her eyes. I apologize. That wasn't my place. She turned to leave. Daniel spoke before he knew he would. Do you have children? Grace paused. No, sir. Then how would you know? The question came out sharp. Too sharp. Robert shifted beside him. Grace absorbed it without flinching. Her face changed, but only slightly. A shadow crossed her eyes. I helped raise my sister's boys after she passed, she said. And I lost my mother when I was young. Daniel said nothing. Grace looked toward the ballroom, then back at him. Some absences are loud, she said. Even when nobody talks about them. The words hit him in the chest. Not dramatically. Not like lightning. Worse. Like truth spoken softly enough that he could not defend himself against it. Some absences are loud. Daniel thought of the nursery. The untouched blue rocking chair. Emily's name sealed behind everyone's teeth. 4 babies screaming into a silence adults had built for them. Grace gave a small nod. Excuse me. This time she walked away. Daniel watched her disappear through the service door. Robert leaned closer. You all right? Daniel did not answer. He was still hearing the sentence. Sometimes it's about true presence. For the rest of the evening, Daniel moved through the event on instinct. He shook hands, took a photograph with the foundation director, accepted another round of condolences, signed a pledge form, spoke for 2 minutes at the podium because the program required it. His voice sounded steady. The audience listened. He thanked the doctors, the nurses, the families. He mentioned Emily once carefully, and the room softened with sympathy. But his mind was elsewhere. It was in the service hallway where Grace Miller had stood with a coffee tray in her hands and said the one thing no specialist nanny or consultant had said plainly. Not routine. Not control. Presence. When Daniel left the hotel, rain had begun falling lightly over Manhattan. The streets reflected red brake lights and gold windows. His driver opened the car door, but Daniel paused under the awning. Through the glass doors behind him, he saw Grace again. She was helping stack chairs near the edge of the ballroom, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her face tired now that the guests were gone. Another server said something to her. Grace smiled. A small smile. Real. Daniel stepped into the rain before he could think too much about it. All the way home he said nothing. Robert had chosen not to ride with him. Mark had sent 3 messages. Helen had sent 1. They are crying, but I have them. Drive safely. Daniel stared at the message until the screen dimmed. When he reached the mansion, the crying was waiting. Of course it was. It poured from upstairs the moment he opened the front door. But this time, as Daniel stood in the foyer with rain on his tuxedo shoulders, he did not hear only noise. He heard absence. Loud. Living. Begging to be named. He climbed the stairs slowly. At the nursery door he stopped. Helen was inside with Lily in her arms. Noah and Caleb were crying in their cribs. Rose whimpered under a pink blanket. Daniel looked at the blue rocking chair. Then for the first time in weeks he walked to it. He sat down. The wood creaked softly under him. Helen turned surprised. Sir. T2 sir. Daniel reached for Noah. Helen placed the baby in his arms. Noah cried against his chest, tiny fists pressing into Daniel's shirt. Daniel swallowed hard. Then he whispered the name. Emily. The room did not become quiet. Not yet. But something changed in Daniel. A locked door opened. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a quiet woman in a black and white uniform was still speaking. True presence. Daniel did not know it yet, but that sentence would bring Grace Miller back into his life. And when she came, nothing in that house would ever be the same. The next morning, Daniel Whitmore woke in the blue rocking chair. Not in his bed. Not even close. His neck ached. His right arm had gone numb under Noah's small weight. Lily slept against his other side, her cheek pressed into the wrinkled front of his dress shirt. Caleb and Rose were finally quiet in their cribs, their tiny chests rising and falling under soft cotton blankets. For one fragile moment the nursery was still. Daniel did not move. He did not even breathe deeply. He just sat there, afraid the smallest sound would break whatever mercy had entered the room. The lamp glowed low beside him. Rain tapped against the window. Somewhere downstairs the old refrigerator clicked on with a tired hum. The house felt different at that hour. Not healed. Not peaceful. But listening. Daniel looked down at Noah. The baby's fist was curled around one of his shirt buttons. A strange ache moved through Daniel's chest. Not pain exactly. Recognition. These children were not machines to be adjusted. They were not schedules to be corrected. They were not problems to be solved before morning. They were grieving in the only language they had. And he had spent 3 months trying to quiet the language instead of hearing it. Grace Miller's voice returned to him. Sometimes it isn't about technique or experience. He had hated the sentence when she said it. It sounded too simple. Too soft. Almost insulting. What did a hotel server know about 4 premature infants, medical records, night nurses, sleep consultants, and a house drowning in grief? But sitting there, with Noah breathing against his chest, Daniel realized the sentence had followed him home because it was not simple. It was frightening. Technique was easy to purchase. Experience could be hired. Presence had to be given. And Daniel had been present in the house, yes. But not fully. His body had been there. His heart had been hiding. When Noah stirred, Daniel leaned down and whispered, "I'm here." The baby's face tightened. A cry built in his chest. Daniel's first instinct rose fast. Stand up. Bounce. Check the diaper. Check the bottle. Do something. Fix it. But he stopped himself. He stayed seated. He placed his palm gently across Noah's back and whispered again, slower this time. "I'm here, little star." The nickname came out before he could stop it. Emily's name for them. Noah's mouth opened. A small cry escaped. Then another. But Daniel did not panic. He did not rush. He held him closer. "I know," he said, his own voice breaking. "I know you miss her." The room seemed to tighten around the words. Lily shifted against his left arm. Caleb made a tiny sound in his crib. Daniel swallowed hard. "I miss her too." Noah cried harder for a few seconds. Then strangely the cry changed. It was still sad. Still small. But the sharp edge softened. It was no longer a siren. It was a child answering. Daniel closed his eyes. For 3 months he had avoided saying Emily's name because he thought it would bring pain into the room. Now he understood. The pain had already been there. The silence had only made it lonelier. At 6:30 Helen Parker stepped quietly into the nursery and stopped at the door. Daniel looked up. He must have looked terrible. Tuxedo, shirt wrinkled. Bow tie gone. hair messy, eyes red. But Helen did not comment. Her eyes moved from Daniel to the sleeping babies, then back again. You sat here all night, she whispered. Daniel nodded. Most of it? Helen's face softened. How are they? He looked down at Noah. Still hurting. The answer surprised both of them. Because for once he had not said tired. Or fussy. Or impossible. Hurting. Helen stepped into the room slowly. That may be the truest thing anyone has said in this house in a while. Daniel looked toward the blue rocking chair beneath him. I said her name. Helen did not ask whose name. She knew. The whole house knew. And Daniel's eyes filled, but he did not look away. They cried. Helen nodded gently. They were already crying, sir. That sentence stayed with him all day. They were already crying. By noon, Daniel was supposed to be on a call with the Chicago investors. Mark Ellis called 3 times. Robert Langford sent a message asking whether Daniel would attend remotely. Daniel typed back one line. Not today. Handle it without me? He stared at the message before sending it. The old Daniel would never have done that. The old Daniel believed every room needed him. Every decision required his hand. Every crisis waited for his command. But the old Daniel had never held 4 grieving babies before sunrise. He sent the message. Then he turned off the phone. No applause. No dramatic music. Just one man choosing the nursery over the boardroom. For the first time in months, he spent the day without trying to control the house. He watched. That was all. He watched the babies' faces before they cried. Noah's brow tightened first. Lily turned her head toward sounds. Caleb kicked when the room became too quiet. Rose calmed fastest when someone's hand rested lightly over her chest. He noticed things no resume had listed. No monitor had explained. No specialist had measured. He learned that the babies did not always want movement. Sometimes rocking made them worse. Sometimes a bottle was not the answer. Sometimes the sound machine filled the room but did not comfort anyone. And he learned something worse. He had been afraid of holding them when they cried, not because he did not love them, because their crying accused him. Every scream seemed to say, "Where is she?" And he had no answer. So he had chased solutions, hired experts, requested tests, built routines. Anything to avoid sitting still with a pain he could not remove. Now he tried sitting still. It was harder than any meeting he had ever led. At 2:00 p.m., Rose began crying in her crib. Her little face twisted, her legs pulling toward her belly. Daniel checked her diaper. Clean, bottle, not time yet, temperature, normal. His hands started to move faster. Then he stopped. He remembered Grace. True presence. He lifted Rose, carefully sat in the rocking chair and held her against his chest. No bouncing. No desperate shushing. No bargaining with God. Just his hand on her back. His breath slow. His voice low. Your mommy loved this chair, he whispered. She picked it before she knew which one of you would be the loudest. Rose cried. Daniel smiled through wet eyes. I think it might be you. Her tiny fingers opened against his shirt. He kept talking. She called you her little stars. All 4 of you. She said this house would never be quiet again. A laugh broke out of him. Small. Painful. Real? She was right. Rose's crying softened into uneven breaths. Daniel kept going because stopping felt wrong now. She wanted yellow curtains at first. I said blue. She said I had no taste. She was correct. From the crib, Caleb stirred. Daniel looked over. You hear that, buddy? Your mom was always right. No miracle happened. Rose did not fall instantly asleep. The heavens did not open. But the room changed. Not because grief left. Because someone finally sat beside it. That evening, Daniel found himself standing in the kitchen with Helen while bottles warmed on the counter. The sky outside had turned dark purple. The windows reflected their tired faces. Helen stirred formula with careful circles. You're different today, she said. Daniel leaned against the counter. I don't know if different is better. It is. He looked toward the stairs. They still cry. They may cry for a while. I don't know how to do this. Helen set the bottle down. No one does at first. Daniel almost said Emily would have, but he stopped. Maybe Emily would have struggled too. Maybe she would have cried in this kitchen at 3:00 a.m. Maybe she would have felt lost. Maybe he had turned her into a perfect memory because a perfect memory could not argue doubt or break. A real woman had loved those babies. A real woman had died. And real children were left behind. So was a real father. Late that night, after all 4 babies had cried in turns and slept in pieces, Daniel sat in the hallway outside the nursery. The door was open. The monitor glowed beside him. His phone lay in his hand. On the screen was the number for the Grand Meridian Hotel. He had asked Mark to find Grace Miller's full name and workplace. He told himself it was only to thank her. That was not the truth. He needed to know why her words had reached a place no expert had touched. He needed to know how a woman balancing coffee cups had seen his house more clearly than the people paid to enter it. His thumb hovered over the call button. Then Caleb cried. Daniel looked toward the nursery. For once he did not sigh. He stood, walked in and picked up his son. I'm coming, he whispered. Daddy's coming. Caleb cried against him. Daniel held him anyway. No one fixed anything in that moment. No one made the night easy. But Daniel stayed. No one asked him to. No one praised him. He just did it. And somewhere beyond the mansion, beyond the rain, beyond the sleepless dark, the memory of Grace Miller's quiet sentence kept burning like a porch light. Not technique. Not experience. Presence. True presence. 3 nights passed before Daniel Whitmore finally made the call. Not because he forgot. He thought about it constantly. Grace Miller's words followed him everywhere. Into the nursery. Into the kitchen. Into the shower. Into the empty bedroom, where Emily's side of the closet still smelled faintly like lavender and vanilla lotion. Sometimes it isn't about technique or experience. Every time one of the babies cried, the sentence returned. When Noah stiffened in his arms. When Lily turned her face toward the blue rocking chair. When Caleb cried himself hoarse. When Rose finally fell asleep with tears drying on her cheeks. Daniel kept hearing it. True presence. Still calling Grace felt impossible. She was not a nanny, she was not a nurse. She had no framed certification, no agency profile, no professional references from wealthy families on the Upper East Side. She was a woman he had met for less than 2 minutes at a charity dinner. A hotel server. A stranger. And yet, after everything he had paid for, after every expert had walked out of his house, Grace Miller was the only person whose words had made the crying make sense. On the 3rd night at 1:38 a.m., Daniel stood in the dark kitchen with his phone in his hand. The babies were upstairs with Helen. Not sleeping. Never sleeping for long. Their cries drifted down through the ceiling, softer now, but still there, like the house itself was wounded. Daniel stared at the number Mark Ellis had found. Grace Miller. No agency. No profile. Just a phone number attached to an employee record from the Grand Meridian Hotel. Daniel pressed call before he could talk himself out of it. It rang 4 times. Then a tired woman's voice answered. Hello? Daniel straightened as if she could see him. Miss Miller. A pause. Yes. This is Daniel Whitmore. Another pause. Longer this time. From upstairs, Caleb cried sharply. Daniel closed his eyes. We met at the Grand Meridian charity event. I remember, she said. Her voice changed. Not warmer exactly. More guarded. Daniel looked toward the ceiling. I'm sorry for calling this late. Is everything all right? He almost lied. Old habit. Powerful men do not call strangers at 1:38 a.m. and say they are breaking. But the crying upstairs rose again. All 4 now. Noah. Lily. Caleb. Rose. Daniel pressed his free hand against the counter. No, he said quietly. It isn't. Grace said nothing. Daniel swallowed. You said something that night. About presence. About absence being loud. The line stayed silent, but he could hear her breathing. I haven't been able to forget it. Grace's voice softened by 1 degree. I'm sorry if I overstepped. You didn't. He looked down at his hand. It was shaking. My children won't sleep. They cry all night. I've hired everyone. Nurses. Nannies. Specialists. I've taken them to doctors. There's nothing medically wrong, but nothing is working. Grace did not interrupt. That alone made him continue. My wife died after they were born. Emily. Their mother. The name came easier now, but it still hurt. We don't talk about her enough. I didn't talk about her at all for a while. I thought I was protecting them. Or maybe myself. His voice dropped. I don't know anymore. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Mr. Whitmore, why are you calling me? There it was. The question he had feared. Daniel looked toward the staircase. The crying had become frantic. Helen's footsteps moved across the nursery floor above him. I need help. He had said those words to doctors. To agencies. To employees. But never like this. Never stripped bare. I know you don't work as a nanny, he said quickly. And I know this is unusual. But I want to hire you. Just for 1 week. Nights only. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. If it doesn't work, I won't ask again. Grace let out a slow breath. Mr. Whitmore. I'll pay whatever you want. The words came too fast. Too familiar. Money as a bridge. Money as a weapon. Money as panic wearing a suit. Grace's voice changed. That's not the first thing you should say. Daniel froze. She had not said it harshly. That made it hit harder. "I'm sorry," he said. "And he meant it?" Grace was quiet. "I'm not trained for this. I know. I'm not a newborn specialist. I know. I work breakfast shifts at the hotel and events when they need extra hands. I can't quit. I have rent. Bills? I'm not asking you to quit. I've only cared for my nephews when my sister was sick. That's different from 4 premature babies. I know. Do you?" Daniel had no answer. Grace continued, not unkindly. 4 babies crying through grief is not something a person fixes in a week. Daniel closed his eyes. "I'm not asking you to fix them." The word surprised him. Because a week ago that was exactly what he would have asked. Fix them. Stop the crying. Solve the problem. Now, after 3 nights of sitting with the babies instead of fighting them, he understood enough to know better. "I'm asking you to try," he said, "because I think you heard something in that ballroom that everyone else missed. I think you understand something I don't." Grace's breathing shifted on the line. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "My mother died when I was 7. Daniel did not move. The adults stopped saying her name because they thought it would upset me. But her name was already inside me. Every room felt wrong without it. Nobody understood that silence can feel like being left alone twice." Daniel looked toward the dark hallway. "Silence can feel like being left alone twice." He gripped the phone harder. Grace continued. "When my sister died, her boys were little. Too little, people said. Too young to understand, people said. But they understood her absence. They understood her smell was gone, her voice was gone, her hands were gone. They cried for months." "What helped?" Daniel asked. Grace did not answer right away. "Not one thing. Not magic. Not a trick." Then softly, "We stopped pretending nothing had happened." Daniel felt those words settle into him. Upstairs, one of the babies let out a broken sob. He turned toward the sound. Grace heard it through the phone. For the first time, her own voice trembled. "That's one of them." "Yes." "Which one?" Daniel was startled by the question. Most people asked how many, how old, were they healthy? Did they sleep? Grace asked which one. "Noah," he said. "He's the smallest." Another cry followed. "And that's Lily," Daniel added before she asked. Then Caleb. "Rose is the one with the little rasp when she's tired." Grace was silent. But Daniel could feel her listening. Not to him. To them. Finally she said, "If I come, I have conditions." Daniel's heart moved. "Anything. No cameras." He frowned. "What?" "No watching me through monitors like I'm an experiment. You can keep your baby monitors for safety, but I won't be judged every second by a screen." Daniel thought of the nights he had watched nannies fail through black and white video. "All right. No rushing in unless I ask or unless there's danger. That may be difficult." "I know." He exhaled. "All right? No pretending their mother never existed." His throat tightened. Daniel looked toward the staircase again. "All right. And I can only do nights. 10 to 6 like you said. I need to leave by 6:15 to catch the train and make my morning shift." Daniel almost offered to send a car. Then he stopped himself. "Understood." "And Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes. I don't want whatever amount you think will make me say yes." He blinked. "Then what do you want?" "A fair wage. Written down. No favors. No debt. No feeling like you bought me." Daniel lowered his head. For the first time in years, someone had refused to be pulled into his world on his terms. It should have annoyed him. Instead, it steadied him. "All right," he said. "A fair wage." Grace was quiet again. Then she asked, "When?" Daniel looked at the clock. 1:49 a.m. "Tomorrow night." "No," Grace said. "Tonight?" Daniel stopped breathing. "I can be there in 40 minutes. You don't have to. The babies are crying now." That was all she said. No grand promise. No dramatic speech. No claim that she knew the answer. Just that. "The babies are crying now." Daniel closed his eyes. "Yes," he whispered. "They are. Text me the address." The line ended. For several seconds, Daniel stood in the kitchen with the phone still pressed to his ear. Then he sent the address. His hands were still shaking, but something in the room had shifted. Not hope exactly. Hope felt too bright. This was smaller. A match flame. A doorway cracked open. He went upstairs. Helen stood in the nursery holding Lily, her face drawn with exhaustion. Noah and Caleb cried in their cribs. Rose whimpered against the mattress, her tiny voice nearly gone. Daniel stepped into the room. "I called someone," he said. Helen looked at him. "A nanny?" He hesitated. "No." Helen waited. "A woman from the charity event. Grace Miller." Helen's brows pulled together. "The server." Daniel nodded. Helen looked at the babies, then back at him. For a moment Daniel expected concern. Maybe judgment. Maybe the look people gave desperate men when desperation made them unreasonable. But Helen only said, "Does she know?" "Know what?" Helen's eyes softened. "That they aren't just crying." Daniel looked toward Rose. "Yes," he said. "I think she does." At 2:34 a.m. headlights swept across the nursery wall. Daniel went downstairs before the doorbell rang. He opened the front door. Grace Miller stood on the porch beneath a black umbrella, rain dripping from its edges. She wore a plain navy coat over dark clothes, her hair tied back, a canvas bag on one shoulder. No uniform tonight. No tray. No ballroom lights. Just a tired woman at a rich man's door in the middle of the night. For a second neither of them spoke. From upstairs the babies cried. Grace looked past him toward the sound. Her face changed. Not fear. Not surprise. Something deeper. Recognition. Daniel stepped aside. "Thank you for coming." Grace closed the umbrella, shook rain from the edge and crossed the threshold. "No promises," she said. Daniel nodded. "No promises." She looked at him then directly. "But we won't leave them alone in it." And with that, Grace Miller entered the house. Not as an expert. Not as a miracle worker. Not as someone with a resume that could impress Daniel Whitmore. She entered as someone who knew grief had a sound. And upstairs, 4 babies cried into the dark, not knowing that for the first time in 3 months someone was coming who would not try to silence their pain before listening to it. Grace Miller did not rush upstairs. That was the first thing Daniel noticed. Every nanny before her had moved fast the moment she heard the crying. Fast hands, fast steps, fast voices. They entered the nursery like firefighters running toward smoke, armed with bottles, blankets, techniques, and fear hidden behind professional smiles. Grace did not do that. She stood in the foyer for a moment and listened. The rain tapped against the tall windows behind her. Her coat dripped onto the marble floor. Upstairs, all 4 babies were crying now, their voices tangled together in the dark like one long wounded sound. Daniel stood beside her, unable to stay still. "They've been like this for hours," he said. Noah started first. Then Caleb. Lily had maybe 20 minutes of sleep. Rose barely has a voice left. Grace nodded, but she did not look at him. She looked toward the staircase. Not with panic. With attention. As if the crying had words inside it. Helen Parker appeared at the top of the stairs, holding Lily against her shoulder. The older woman looked exhausted, her gray hair loose at the temples, her cardigan wrinkled, one slipper half off her foot. "Mr. Whitmore," she called softly. Daniel looked up. "This is Grace?" Helen's eyes moved to the woman in the foyer. For one careful second, 2 women from very different worlds studied each other. Then Rose gave a hoarse cry from the nursery and all introductions became useless. Grace removed her coat and folded it over the banister. "May I wash my hands?" Daniel blinked. "Yes. Of course." He led her to the downstairs powder room. She washed carefully, slowly, with warm water and soap rubbing between her fingers, under her nails, around her wrists. Not like a nurse making a show of cleanliness. Like someone preparing to hold something sacred. Daniel watched from the hallway, ashamed of how badly he wanted her to hurry. When she finished, she dried her hands, took one breath and said, "Now show me where they are." They climbed the stairs together. With each step, the crying grew louder. Daniel felt his chest tighten the way it always did. His body prepared for battle. Shoulders raised, jaw locked. Mind racing through the checklist. Bottles. Diapers. Temperature. Swaddles. Sound machine. Lights. But Grace walked beside him without speeding up. At the nursery door, she stopped. The room glowed with soft yellow light. 4 cribs stood in a careful row. Bottles sat on the side table. Burp cloths lay over the arm of the blue rocking chair. A white noise machine hissed from the dresser, filling the room with fake ocean waves that comforted no one. Noah was red-faced and twisting in his blanket. Caleb kicked hard enough to shake the mattress. Rose cried in short, broken rasps. Lily trembled against Helen's shoulder, too tired to scream but too hurt to rest. Grace looked at all 4. Then she did something no one expected. She turned off the sound machine. The fake ocean died. The room became raw. Just rain. Breathing. Crying. Daniel stepped forward at once. "They usually need that." Grace shook her head gently. "Maybe adults need it." That stopped him. She walked to the blue rocking chair and touched the back of it with her fingertips. This was their mother's chair. Daniel's throat tightened. "Yes." Grace looked at him, then at Helen. "Bring them here." Daniel frowned. All 4. All 4. "Holding them together isn't safe." "It can be," Grace said. "If we do it slowly." Helen stepped in before Daniel could argue. "I'll help." Grace sat down in the blue rocking chair. Not stiffly. Not like someone taking charge. She sat as if the chair already knew grief and she was asking permission to share it. Helen brought Lily first. Grace opened her arms. Lily curled against her chest, still trembling. Grace did not bounce her, did not shush her, did not sing. She only held her close and lowered her cheek near the baby's head. "Hello, Lily," she whispered. "I hear you." Daniel stood frozen. "I hear you." Not stop. Not hush. Not it's okay. "I hear you." Then Daniel brought Noah. His smallest son felt hot from crying, his face wet, his fists tight. Grace adjusted Lily carefully and made room against her other side. Noah cried harder when Daniel passed him over. Daniel flinched. Grace noticed. "He's not rejecting you," she said softly. "He's tired." Daniel swallowed. "I know." But he had not known. Not really. Caleb came next. Helen supported his head while Grace shifted her knees, creating a careful cradle with her lap and both arms. Caleb fought it at first, legs stiff, mouth wide open, but Grace kept her movements slow and sure. "Easy, Caleb," she murmured. "No one's rushing you." Last came Rose. Her cry was the smallest and somehow the worst. Grace looked at her before taking her. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. 2 words. Daniel had heard people call babies sweetheart before. Nannies. Nurses. Strangers in elevators. This was different. Grace said it like Rose had survived a long journey and arrived wounded at her door. Once all 4 babies were in her arms and lap, the room seemed to hold its breath. It looked impossible. Lily tucked against her left shoulder. Noah against her right. Caleb across her thighs. Rose nestled in the crook of her arm, her tiny face turned toward Grace's heartbeat. Daniel stood 3 feet away, hands half raised, ready to catch, ready to correct, ready to control. Grace looked at him. "Sit down. There's no room." "On the floor." He stared at her. Helen almost smiled. Daniel Whitmore, who had sat at tables with billionaires and governors, lowered himself onto the nursery rug like a man who had forgotten what the floor was for. Grace nodded toward Helen. "You too if you can." Helen sat near the crib, back against the wall, rubbing her tired knees. The crying continued. Not as loud now, but still there. Grace did not fight it. She began to speak. Not in a baby voice. Not with practiced sweetness. Just low, steady words. "You've had a hard night," she said. "All of you." "I know." Noah whimpered. Grace looked down at him. "You don't have to tell me all at once. One at a time is fine." Daniel's eyes burned. It was absurd. They were infants. They could not understand sentences. And yet, the room understood something. Grace kept going. "My name is Grace. I'm not your mama. I won't pretend to be. Nobody can be her." Daniel stopped breathing. The word entered the room like a candle in a sealed place. "Mama?" Lily's crying rose suddenly, sharp and wounded. Daniel moved. Grace lifted her eyes. "Stay." 1 word. "Quiet, firm." He stayed. Grace pressed Lily a little closer, her palm spread across the baby's back. "I know," she whispered. "That word hurts, doesn't it?" Helen wiped at her eyes. Daniel looked away. But Grace did not look away from the babies. "I think people have been very careful around you," she said. "Too careful. They fed you. Changed you. Wrapped you up warm. They did all the right things." Rose's little hand opened against Grace's sleeve. "But maybe nobody told you the truth in a way your hearts could feel." The rain thickened against the window. Grace rocked once. Barely. Not a motion meant to force sleep. A motion like breathing. "Your mama loved you," she whispered. Caleb's crying cracked. "She loved you before you saw her face. She carried you under her heart." 4 little stars all crowded together, listening to her from the inside. Daniel covered his mouth with one hand. He had not told Grace that phrase. Little stars. He looked at Helen. Helen shook her head gently. She had not told her either. Grace continued, unaware of the shock moving through him. "She wanted to hold you. She wanted to rock you in this chair. She wanted mornings with bottles and messy blankets. She wanted all the ordinary things people don't know are miracles until they lose them." Noah's cries softened into hiccups. Lily still whimpered, but her body was no longer stiff. Caleb's legs stopped kicking. Rose's eyes fluttered. Daniel stared. Every other nanny had tried to quiet them. Grace was naming the ache. And the ache once named no longer had to scream so hard. She did not sing. She did not perform. She did not pull out any special blanket or secret trick. She only sat in the dead woman's chair with all 4 babies held against her body, and she told the truth gently enough for the room to survive it. "Your daddy misses her too," Grace said. Daniel's head snapped up. Grace did not look at him. He got scared. Grown-ups do that sometimes. They get so scared of sadness that they try to hide it in closets and drawers and quiet rooms. Daniel's eyes filled. "But sadness doesn't disappear because we hide it. It just gets lonely." Helen began to cry silently. Daniel could not move. Grace looked down at the babies. "You are not alone," she whispered. "Not tonight. Not in this room. Not in this house." No one spoke. No one interrupted. The crying slowly changed. It did not vanish like magic. It loosened. It lowered. It became small, uneven breaths. Noah's fingers relaxed first. Lily's cheek settled against Grace's shirt. Caleb gave one last broken sigh and turned his face toward her knee. Rose, exhausted beyond words, slipped into sleep with her mouth still slightly open. Daniel watched as if the laws of the world had been rewritten in front of him. For the first time in hours, the nursery was quiet. Not silent. Quiet. Real quiet. The kind that had breathing inside it. Grace kept rocking by an inch, no more. Daniel whispered, "How did you do that?" Grace looked at him then. Her eyes were tired, kind, and very sad. "I didn't do anything fancy." He stared at the 4 babies sleeping in her arms. "You did something." She looked down at them. "I stopped trying to make them stop hurting." Daniel felt the words enter him slowly. Grace leaned back in the blue chair, holding the children like the night itself had finally become safe enough to rest in. "No one asked them what they lost," she said. "So they kept telling you?" Daniel lowered his head. Because upstairs in the soft yellow light with rain on the glass and 4 babies breathing against a stranger's heart, he finally understood. Grace Miller had not come with a technique. She had come with presence. And for the first time in 3 months, the babies were not being managed. They were being held. Grace Miller stayed in the blue rocking chair long after the babies fell quiet. She did not celebrate. She did not smile like someone who had solved a puzzle. She only sat there holding all 4 children with the careful stillness of a woman who understood that peace could be frightened away by one careless movement. Daniel Whitmore sat on the nursery rug across from her, unable to look away. Noah slept against Grace's right shoulder, one fist open now, his tiny fingers resting against the fabric of her sleeve. Lily was tucked close to her chest, her breathing still uneven from crying. Caleb lay across her lap with his cheek turned toward the lamplight. Rose, small and hoarse, had curled into the bend of Grace's elbow as if she had finally found a place where the world did not hurt so loudly. The room was not silent. It was better than silent. It had life in it. Soft breathing. Rain at the window. The slow creak of the rocking chair. Daniel had paid thousands of dollars for experts to create this moment. Grace had created it by telling the truth. For several minutes no one spoke. Then Lily stirred. Her tiny mouth tightened. Her brow wrinkled. A weak cry began to build in her chest. Daniel moved automatically. Grace lifted one hand slightly. "Wait." He froze. Lily's cry slipped out thin and wounded. Grace looked down at her and whispered, "I know, sweetheart. I said her name, didn't I?" Daniel's throat closed. Grace did not avoid the word. She went toward it. "Your mama," she said softly. "Emily." The name filled the room again. This time it did not feel like an accident. It felt like a door opening. Lily's cry sharpened, and Noah shifted against Grace's shoulder. Caleb made a small sound in his sleep. Rose's eyelids fluttered. Daniel's whole body tensed. Grace kept rocking. Just an inch. Forward. Back. Forward. Back. "That name belongs in here," she whispered. "It belongs with your blankets. It belongs with your bottles. It belongs in this chair. It belongs in your daddy's voice." Daniel looked down at his hands. His fingers were locked together so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. Grace noticed, but she did not soften the truth. "She was not a secret," Grace continued. "She was your first home." Helen Parker, still sitting near the crib, covered her mouth. Daniel could barely breathe. Your first home. That was exactly what Emily had been. Before the mansion. Before the nursery. Before the cribs with engraved nameplates. Before the carefully folded blankets. There had been Emily. Her body. Her heartbeat. Her voice. Her warmth. 4 babies crowded beneath her ribs, listening to her laugh at midnight when Daniel tried to read parenting books out loud in a serious voice. 4 babies resting inside the rhythm of her breathing. 4 little lives learning the sound of love before they ever saw light. Then the sound disappeared. And Daniel had expected them not to notice. Because they were small. Because they were new. Because grief in a baby had no words. Grace leaned down until her cheek almost touched Lily's head. "I'm going to tell you about her," she whispered. "Not because it won't hurt. It may hurt. But because love is not something we erase just because it hurts." Daniel shut his eyes. A tear slid down his face. Grace's voice stayed low, steady, almost like a prayer. "Your mama's name was Emily Whitmore. She waited for you. She loved you before anyone else could see your faces. She carried you through hard days. She carried you when her back hurt. She carried you when she couldn't sleep. She carried you when everybody told her to rest and she said, 'I am resting. I'm sitting down, aren't I?'" Helen gave a broken little laugh through her tears. Daniel looked up. You knew that. Grace turned her eyes to him. No, she said gently. But women like her always say something like that. The corner of Daniel's mouth trembled. Because Emily had said almost exactly those words. More than once. Grace looked back down at the babies. She picked this chair, didn't she? Daniel nodded, but his voice would not come. Grace waited. This time she wanted him to say it. Daniel swallowed. Yes. The word scraped out. Grace kept her gaze on the babies. Tell them? Daniel stared at her. What? Tell them about the chair. He looked at Noah, Lily, Caleb and Rose sleeping in Grace's arms. His chest tightened with fear so sudden it felt physical. I don't know how. Grace's answer was immediate. Yes, you do. No one else would have spoken to him like that. Not in his house. Not with that much money in the walls. Not while he looked like he might break. But Grace did. Not harshly. Honestly. Daniel wiped his face with the heel of his hand. He looked at the blue rocking chair. Then he looked at his children. Your mom, he began. His voice failed. He tried again. Your mom wanted this chair before we even knew the nursery colors. The babies did not answer. Of course they did not. But Grace's rocking slowed, making room for him. She said every nursery needed one thing that felt like sky. Daniel continued. I told her blue was too ordinary. She told me I was not allowed to have opinions until I learned the difference between teal and powder blue. Helen smiled through tears. Daniel breathed out almost a laugh. She sat in this chair the day it arrived. The delivery men had barely left. She was supposed to be resting, but she came in here anyway. She sat down, put both hands on her belly and said, he stopped. The memory rose so clearly it hurt. Emily barefoot. Hair loose. Face tired but glowing. Hands on the impossible curve of her stomach. Daniel whispered. She said, this is where I'm going to meet them. Lily's crying softened into a tiny sigh. Daniel saw it. He stopped breathing. Grace nodded once. Keep going. Daniel looked at Caleb. She was scared, he said. She tried not to show it, but she was. 4 babies at once. The doctors. The appointments. The risks. She used to joke because joking was how she fought fear. His voice steadied as he spoke. She called you her little stars. Grace's eyes flickered. Daniel noticed. You said that earlier, he whispered. Grace looked down at the babies. It came to me. He did not ask more. Some moments did not need explaining. Daniel leaned forward slightly. She talked to you every night, he said. Even when she was exhausted. Especially then. She would put one hand here. He placed his palm over his own stomach, remembering. And one hand here. She said she could tell who was kicking. I never believed her. She said Noah was polite. Lily was dramatic. Caleb was stubborn. Rose was sneaky because she only moved when no one was watching. Helen laughed softly. Daniel did too. This time it did not feel like betrayal. It felt like bringing Emily back into the room, one honest piece at a time. Grace whispered to Rose, sneaky girl. Rose gave the smallest breath, almost a sigh. Daniel's face crumpled. For months he had thought saying Emily's name would break them. But they had been breaking without it. Grace adjusted Noah carefully, her arms still full, her voice still calm. They may cry when you talk about her, she said. That doesn't mean you hurt them. Daniel looked at her. It feels like it. I know. How do I know the difference? Grace's eyes softened. Hurt that is named can begin to move. Hurt that is buried stays trapped. Daniel let that sink in. He looked around the nursery. At the untouched shelves. The folded clothes Emily had chosen. The framed moon and stars print she had ordered. The blue rocking chair that had sat like a memorial no one dared approach. This room had never been empty of her. Only empty of her name. Grace turned her face toward the babies again. Your mama is not here the way she wanted to be, she whispered. That is the hardest truth. And I am sorry. I am so sorry. Her voice trembled for the first time. Not from fear. From memory. Daniel remembered what she had said on the phone. Her mother died when she was 7. Her sister died and left boys behind. Grace was not speaking as a stranger guessing at grief. She was speaking as someone who had lived inside rooms where a name went missing. You can miss her, Grace told the babies. You can cry for her. You can be angry that her arms are not here. You can want what cannot come back. Daniel lowered his head. Because those words were not only for the babies, they were for him. Grace continued. But you are not alone. Your daddy is here. He is scared, but he is here. And scared people can still love you well. They just have to stop hiding. Daniel pressed both hands over his face. No one in his life had said the truth that plainly. Not Robert. Not doctors. Not friends. They had told him he was strong. Grace told him he was scared. And somehow that felt kinder. Noah stirred again, his face tightening. Daniel moved closer on the rug. Can I take him? Grace looked at him for a long second. Then she nodded. Slowly. Daniel rose to his knees and reached out. Grace shifted Noah toward him with careful hands. The baby woke halfway and gave a soft, unhappy cry. Daniel pulled him against his chest. His first instinct was to bounce. He stopped. He sat back on the rug, Noah against his heart. The baby cried once. Then again. Daniel closed his eyes. Your mama loved you, he whispered. Noah trembled. Daniel's voice broke, but he kept going. She loved you so much, and I should have told you that every day. Grace watched in silence. Helen wept openly now. Daniel pressed his lips to Noah's hair. I'm sorry, buddy. Daddy got lost. The words opened something inside him. Not all of it. Not enough to make the grief leave. But enough to let air in. Noah's tiny hand pressed against Daniel's shirt. The crying softened. Not gone, but softer. Daniel looked at Grace, stunned. She did not look surprised. She only nodded as if to say, yes. This is how it begins. The clock on the dresser read 3:48 Outside the rain had stopped. The window glass held the faint reflection of the nursery, a tired father on the floor, a quiet woman in a blue rocking chair, an older housekeeper wiping tears from her cheeks, and 4 babies surrounded at last by the one truth everyone had been afraid to say. Their mother was gone. Their mother had loved them. Both could be true. Both had to be spoken. And in that room, for the first time since Emily died, grief was no longer a monster hiding in the walls. It was a guest pulled into the light. Painful. Unwanted. But finally not alone. Grace kept rocking. Daniel kept holding Noah. And somewhere in the space between one breath and the next, the house began to remember the sound of Emily's name without falling apart. By 4:00 a.m., the impossible had not happened. Not completely. The babies were not magically healed. The house had not transformed into some perfect nursery scene from a magazine. No soft music played, no golden light poured through the window. No one suddenly knew what to do forever. No. The room still smelled like warm formula, damp blankets, and sleepless fear. Daniel's knees hurt from sitting on the rug. Helen's eyes were swollen from crying. Grace's arms must have been aching from holding 3 babies at once, though she never said so. And still something had changed. The crying no longer ruled the room. It moved through it. That was different. Before Grace came, the cries had filled every corner like smoke. They choked everyone. They made adults panic. They made Daniel feel accused, helpless, ashamed. Now, when Lily whimpered, Grace answered her with a whisper. When Caleb stirred, Helen laid one gentle hand across his blanket. When Noah cried against Daniel's chest, Daniel did not rush to silence him. He listened. That was the miracle. Not silence. Listening. Daniel sat with Noah tucked against his heart, feeling the baby's tiny body tremble from leftover sobs. A month ago, Daniel would have stood up at once. He would have bounced, paced, checked the bottle warmer, adjusted the swaddle, called the doctor, searched for something physical to fix. Now he lowered his cheek to Noah's head and whispered, I know, buddy, I know. Noah gave a broken little sound. Daniel closed his eyes. You miss her. The words did not destroy the room. They settled into it. Noah's fist opened slowly against Daniel's shirt. Across from him, Grace watched without interrupting. Lily slept against her chest. Rose was curled in the crook of her arm. Caleb lay across her lap, still awake, his dark little eyes half open and shining in the nursery light. Grace looked down at him. You're fighting sleep, aren't you? She whispered. That's all right. Sleep probably feels scary when everything keeps changing. Daniel looked up. Can babies feel that? Grace did not answer quickly. I think bodies remember what minds can't explain. Caleb's lip trembled. Grace rested 2 fingers lightly against his back. Your mama's heartbeat was your first music, she said. Then one day that music was gone. Nobody asked your permission. Nobody explained it. Everybody just kept moving around you, acting like bottles and blankets could replace a whole person. Daniel's throat tightened again. But this time he did not look away. Caleb's eyes blinked slowly. Once. Twice. His little body gave a tired shiver. Then he slept. Daniel stared. It was not dramatic. No thunder. No sudden holy silence. Just a baby who had cried for hours finally surrendering, not because someone had forced him but because someone had made the room feel safe enough to let go. Grace leaned back carefully. There you are, she whispered. Helen wiped her cheek with her sleeve. I haven't seen him fall asleep like that in weeks. Daniel's voice was rough. Neither have I. Grace looked at him. Then remember this. He didn't stop hurting. He stopped feeling alone in it. That sentence stayed in the room longer than the sound of crying ever had. He didn't stop hurting. He stopped feeling alone. Daniel looked at Noah now, breathing heavier against his chest. Lily, Caleb, and Rose were asleep in Grace's arms and lap. 4 tiny bodies. 4 grieving hearts. 4 children he had loved fiercely but misunderstood completely. He had thought their crying meant he was failing. Maybe it meant they were asking him to come closer. The first night with Grace did not end in perfect rest. At 4:40, Rose woke with a rasping cry and needed a bottle. At 5:05 Lily startled and cried, so hard her face turned red. At 5:30 Noah needed changing. Caleb woke when Daniel opened the diaper drawer too loudly. But each time the room responded differently. No panic. No rushing. No angry whispering. No desperate bargaining. Grace would speak first, always softly. Rose, I hear you. Lily, that scared you. Noah, we're right here. Caleb, nobody's leaving. Daniel began repeating her words awkwardly at first. They felt strange in his mouth. Too tender. Too exposed. He had spent his adult life speaking in decisions, instructions, numbers. Now he was learning the language of comfort. Not perfect. But real. When Lily cried after startling, Daniel picked her up. She arched against him, furious, tired, lost. His old fear returned. She doesn't want me. Grace saw it cross his face. Don't make her crying about rejection, she said gently. Make it about need. Daniel swallowed. He looked down at Lily. Need? Not rejection. He held her a little closer. I'm here, he whispered. I'm not, Mommy. I know. But I'm here. Lily cried harder for 10 seconds. 10 brutal seconds. Daniel almost handed her back. Grace shook her head once. Stay. So he stayed. Then Lily's body softened little by little until her head rested under his chin. Daniel looked stunned. Helen smiled through fresh tears. Grace only said, there. One word. But it sounded like a door opening. By 6:00 a.m. the sky outside the nursery window had turned pale gray. Morning touched the edges of the curtains. The rain had washed the trees clean and drops clung to the glass like tiny beads of light. Grace carefully placed Rose in her crib. Then Caleb. Then Lily. Daniel laid Noah down last. He moved slowly, terrified of waking him, lowering him inch by inch onto the mattress. Noah stirred. His little mouth opened. Daniel froze. Grace stood beside him. Hand on his chest, she whispered. Daniel placed his palm lightly over Noah's small body. Talk to him. Daniel bent close. Daddy's here, little star. Noah's face relaxed. He slept. Daniel did not move for several seconds. He was afraid to believe it. All 4 babies were asleep. Not for hours yet. Maybe not even for 20 minutes. But asleep. Together. The room held a quiet so tender it almost hurt. Helen stood near the door, one hand pressed to her heart. Oh, thank God, she whispered. Daniel looked at the cribs. Then at Grace. There were 1,000 things he wanted to say. How? Why did this work? Why did no one tell me? Can you stay forever? Instead, all that came out was thank you. Grace looked exhausted now. Truly exhausted. Her shoulders had dropped. Her face had lost some of the strength she had carried in with her. But her eyes remained steady. I didn't put them to sleep, she said. Daniel frowned slightly. They're sleeping. I helped them feel held. Sleep came after. He looked back at the cribs. That distinction mattered. He knew it would matter for the rest of his life. Downstairs, Grace drank 1 cup of coffee at the kitchen island while Daniel stood across from her, still in the same wrinkled clothes, still barefoot, still looking like a man who had crawled through a storm. Helen went to rest on the couch for an hour. The house was quiet above them. Daniel kept glancing at the ceiling, waiting for the crying to return. Grace noticed. They'll cry again, she said. He looked at her. I know. Do you? He gave a tired breath. I'm trying to. Grace wrapped both hands around the mug. The goal is not to make them never cry. Babies cry. Grieving babies cry more. The goal is to teach their bodies that when they cry, someone comes with calm, not fear. Daniel leaned against the counter. And if I'm afraid, then tell the truth quietly. He almost laughed. To them? To yourself first. The kitchen fell silent. Grace looked toward the staircase. They are learning the world, she said. Right now, the world has felt unpredictable. A mother's presence gone. New arms every week. New voices. New routines. People trying one thing, then another, then leaving. Daniel's face tightened. Each nanny who had quit flashed through his mind. Patricia. Evelyn. Sandra. Megan. Ruth. All of them gone. He had thought of them as failures. Now he wondered what the babies had felt. Another set of arms. Another smell. Another voice. Gone. Grace continued softer now. We cannot undo that. But we can become steady from here. We. Daniel noticed the word. Not you. Not they. We. It struck him so deeply that he had to look down. At 6:12, Grace stood. I need to go. Daniel looked up too fast. Already? My train? I can have Paul drive you. She shook her head. Not this morning. I need the walk. He wanted to argue. He did not. At the front door, dawn had begun to lighten the driveway. The mansion looked peaceful from the outside again. But now for the first time the inside had a piece of that peace too. Grace put on her coat and picked up her canvas bag. Daniel opened the door. Cold morning air entered the foyer. She stepped onto the porch, then turned back. Tonight, he said before she could speak. Grace nodded. 10 o'clock. Daniel hesitated. They slept because of you. Grace's expression softened. No. They slept because someone finally listened. Then she walked down the steps toward the gray morning. Daniel stood in the doorway until she disappeared beyond the gate. Behind him the house remained quiet. For 12 minutes. Only 12. Then a cry came from upstairs. Small. Noah? Daniel turned. His body tensed by old habit. Then he breathed. Slowly. He climbed the stairs, not running this time, not panicking, not angry. At the nursery door, Noah whimpered in his crib. Lily, Caleb and Rose still slept. Daniel walked in and placed his hand on Noah's chest. I hear you, he whispered. The baby blinked up at him through the dim morning light. Daniel's voice trembled, but he stayed. You're not alone. Noah fussed once more. Then quieted. And Daniel Whitmore, who had spent 3 months believing the crying was the enemy, finally understood the truth. The crying had been a message. The babies had been asking for what every grieving heart asks for. Not a fix. Not a trick. Not a perfect answer. A witness. A warm body. A voice brave enough to say the missing person's name. From that morning forward the house did not become easy. But it became different. The cries still came. Yet slowly, night by night, they no longer tore the walls apart. Because Grace had shown them the way. And Daniel had finally begun to follow. By the 4th night, Daniel Whitmore stopped asking Grace Miller what she was doing. That was new. The first night he had watched every movement like a man trying to reverse engineer a miracle. The second night he asked questions in whispers. Why are you holding Rose like that? Should we warm Noah's bottle now? Is Caleb crying because he's hungry? Do you think Lily needs the pacifier? Grace answered when the question mattered. When it did not, she gave him a look that said, be still. And slowly, painfully, Daniel began to understand that his constant questions were not curiosity. They were fear in a tailored shirt. He had spent his entire adult life believing that if he gathered enough information, hired the right people, and paid the right price, every crisis could be pushed into order. A bad contract could be renegotiated. A failing department could be rebuilt. A hostile investor could be outmaneuvered. But babies were not boardrooms. Grief was not a spreadsheet. And no amount of money could turn sorrow into something obedient. That 4th night, the nursery was dim except for the small lamp near the blue rocking chair. Rain had stopped days ago, but the air still carried the damp chill of early spring. Outside, bare branches scratched lightly against the window whenever the wind moved. Inside, Grace sat on the rug instead of the chair. All 4 babies were awake. Not screaming. Awake. That alone felt like a miracle. Noah lay against a folded blanket near her knee, making small, uncertain sounds. Lily rested in Daniel's arms, blinking at him with heavy eyes. Caleb kicked slowly in his crib, not upset, just restless. Rose watched Grace from the crook of Helen's arm, her little mouth opening and closing as if she were testing the world before speaking to it. Grace had asked Daniel to turn off the monitor screen. He had resisted. What if something happens? We are in the room. What about later? Later is later. I need to see them. Grace looked at him, not unkindly. No, you need to feel in control. That had silenced him. Because it was true. Now the black monitor sat face down on the dresser, useless and quiet. Daniel hated it for 10 minutes. Then forgot about it. Grace placed one hand lightly near Noah, not touching him yet. He's looking for contact, she whispered. Daniel leaned forward. How can you tell? Grace nodded toward the baby's hands. Noah's fingers kept opening and closing, brushing the blanket, searching. He's asking with his body. Daniel looked at his son as if seeing him for the first time. Asking? Not fussing. Not causing trouble. Asking. Grace continued, don't rush him. Offer your hand. Daniel shifted Lily carefully in one arm and extended his free hand toward Noah. He expected Noah to cry. Or turn away, or do nothing. Instead, Noah's tiny fingers curled around Daniel's index finger. The grip was weak. Almost nothing. But Daniel felt it like a rope thrown across deep water. His face changed. Grace saw it. There, she said softly. He found you? Daniel did not speak. He could not. For 3 months he had thought of himself as the man failing to reach his children. Now for the first time he wondered if they had been reaching for him the whole time and he had been too busy trying to fix them to notice. The next days unfolded in small lessons. Not dramatic ones. Not the kind people clap for. The real kind. Messy. Slow. Humbling. Grace taught him that Noah cried differently when he was hungry than when he was frightened. Hunger had rhythm. Fear had sharp edges. She taught him that Lily needed a pause before being picked up. A hand on her chest first. A voice. A warning. Lily startled easily as if the world kept arriving too fast. She taught him that Caleb fought sleep because sleep felt like separation. If Daniel stayed beside the crib and kept speaking after laying him down, Caleb could let his eyes close. And tiny Rose with the tired rasp did not need more motion, she needed less. Less noise. Less passing from one adult to another. Less desperate effort. Just a steady body. A warm chest. A voice that did not shake. Every discovery embarrassed Daniel. Because none of it was expensive. None of it required a specialist. None of it looked like the kind of answer a man could buy. On the 6th night he admitted it. The babies had finally settled into a fragile sleep. Helen had gone downstairs to make tea. Grace stood at the nursery dresser folding small blankets with slow practical hands. Daniel leaned against the crib rail looking at the 4 sleeping faces. I thought money could solve this. Grace did not look up. Most people with money think that at first. He gave a tired laugh. You always say things like that. When they're true. Daniel looked at her. I'm serious. So am I. He looked back at the babies. I hired the best nannies. The best doctors. I bought every device they recommended. Smart bassinets. Monitors. Formula warmers. Special mattresses. A consultant told me to install blackout curtains. Another told me to use red light after midnight. One sent me a 9-page sleep schedule. Grace folded another blanket. Did any of it help? For an hour. Sometimes. That's not nothing. No, Daniel said. But it wasn't enough. Grace placed the folded blanket in a drawer. Because you were trying to create peace around the wound without touching the wound. Daniel closed his eyes. The sentence hurt because it was exact. I thought touching it would make it worse. Silence made it worse. He nodded slowly. I know that now, but knowing was not the same as forgiving himself. That came crashing down on the 7th night. It started with Lily. She woke at 1:16 a.m. with a cry so sharp Daniel was on his feet before he fully understood he had moved. Grace had stepped out to wash bottles. Helen was resting downstairs. For the first time that week, Daniel was alone in the nursery with all 4 babies. Lily screamed. Noah woke. Then Caleb. Rose followed with her hoarse little cry. The old panic returned instantly. Hot. Full body. Merciless. Daniel picked up Lily too quickly. She arched away from him. Noah screamed harder. Caleb kicked his blanket loose. Rose's face turned red. No, 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 Daniel whispered. Please. Please don't. His heart pounded. The room tilted. He could feel himself losing the fragile calm Grace had helped him build. He reached for the bottle warmer with one hand while holding Lily with the other. The bottle slipped. Milk spilled across the dresser. He cursed under his breath, then hated himself for it. Lily cried harder. Daniel froze. For one terrible second, he felt anger. Not at Lily exactly. At the helplessness. At the noise. At the fact that love did not make him competent. The feeling scared him so badly that he stepped back from the crib. Grace appeared in the doorway. She took in the scene at once. The spilled milk. The crying babies. Daniel's face. She did not rush. She did not scold. She said, put Lily against your chest. I can't. Yes, you can. I'm making it worse. You're scared. That's different. Lily screamed against him. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I can't fix this. Grace stepped into the room. No, you can't? The honesty hit like a slap. Daniel stared at her. Grace came closer. But you can stay. The room seemed to go silent beneath the crying. You can stay. Not solve. Not win. Not control. Stay. Daniel looked down at Lily. Her tiny face was twisted in misery. Her fists pushed weakly against his shirt. She was not punishing him. She was not rejecting him. She was not proof of his failure. She was a baby in pain. A baby asking not to be alone. Daniel sank into the blue rocking chair. Not gracefully. Almost collapsing. He held Lily against his heart and covered the back of her head with one trembling hand. I'm here, he whispered. His voice broke. I'm scared, but I'm here. Grace moved quietly to Noah's crib, resting a hand on his chest. She did not take over the room. She held one child steady and let Daniel hold the other. That mattered. Daniel noticed. She could have rescued him. Instead, she helped him remain. Caleb's cries lowered first. Rose followed. Noah whimpered under Grace's hand. Lily fought the longest, her small body shaking with sobs until Daniel began whispering Emily's name. "Mommy loved you," he said. "Mommy loved you, Lily. Daddy loves you too. I'm sorry I got scared." Lily's body softened by a fraction. Then another. Daniel wept silently into her hair. He had apologized in boardrooms before. Strategic apologies. Legal apologies. Careful apologies that gave away nothing. This was different. This apology cost him something. It cost him the lie that money, status and control could protect him from being human. By 2:00 a.m., the room had settled again. Grace sat on the floor beside Noah's crib. Daniel remained in the rocking chair with Lily asleep against his chest. His shirt was damp with milk and tears. His face looked wrecked. Grace looked at him. That was important. Daniel gave a weak laugh. That was a disaster. No. All four woke up. And you stayed. He looked down. I almost didn't. But you did? He could not argue. Grace's voice softened. "Mr. Whitmore, your children don't need a perfect father." Daniel looked up. "They need a safe one. A present one. One who can be afraid and still gentle." The words entered him slowly. A safe one. A present one. He had spent months trying to become an expert. A manager of bottles. A buyer of solutions. A commander of routines. But fatherhood was asking for something else. Not perfection. Presence. Not control. Connection. Not answers. Love that stayed in the room. Near dawn, after the babies had gone back to sleep, Daniel walked downstairs alone. The kitchen was dark except for the stove light. He saw the stack of medical folders on the counter, the old sleep schedules, the agency contracts, the printed recommendations from specialists. For weeks, those papers had looked like hope. Now they looked like what they were. Evidence of a man trying to purchase peace while grief sat upstairs waiting to be held. Daniel gathered the papers slowly. He did not throw away the medical records. They mattered. The baby's health mattered. But the rest, the charts, the rigid schedules, the consultant notes promising results in 72 hours, he placed in a drawer and closed it. Not because he was done trying. Because he was done hiding behind trying. When the first morning light touched the kitchen window, Daniel stood there with both hands on the counter and whispered, "I understand." No one heard him. No one applauded. The house was quiet above him for now. And for the first time, Daniel did not mistake quiet for success. Success was not the silence. Success was that when the crying returned, he would no longer reach first for money monitors or instructions. He would reach for his children. Because Grace Miller had shown him the truth he should have known from the beginning. Some wounds cannot be purchased away. Some cries cannot be managed into silence. Some heartbreaks only begin to heal when someone stops trying to fix them from a distance and finally comes close enough to be changed. By the 10th night, Grace Miller no longer felt like a stranger in the Whitmore house. She still arrived at 10. Still wore the same plain navy coat. Still carried the same canvas bag over one shoulder. Still refused the car Daniel offered every morning. But something had shifted. Helen Parker now left a mug for her beside the coffee maker. Daniel no longer greeted her with desperate questions at the front door. And the babies, though still too young to understand names and schedules, seemed to know the rhythm of her steps on the stairs. Not magic. Memory. Their bodies were beginning to learn. At 1:04 p.m., Grace entered the nursery and washed her hands in the small bathroom beside it. When she came out, Daniel was standing by the cribs with Noah against his shoulder and Lily tucked in one arm. Caleb and Rose were awake watching the ceiling mobile turn slowly above them. "They've been calmer tonight," Daniel said. Grace smiled faintly. "Good." He hesitated. "I told them about Emily again." Grace looked at him. "What did you tell them?" Daniel glanced at the blue rocking chair. "That she used to hum when she folded baby clothes." "Badly." Grace's smile deepened. "Badly. Terribly." She had no idea how bad. From his crib, Caleb kicked once. Daniel looked down at him. "Yes, buddy, it's true. Your mother was wonderful, but she could not carry a tune." For the first time in months, Daniel laughed in the nursery without feeling guilty. The sound surprised him. It surprised Helen too. She stood near the dresser folding onesies and looked up, her eyes soft. Grace noticed all of it. The laugh. The way Daniel did not hide it. The way the babies heard Emily's name and the room did not collapse. This was healing, she thought. Not the clean kind people imagined. The real kind. A name spoken without fear. A memory allowed to breathe. A father learning that grief and love could sit in the same room. But healing has a way of opening locked doors. And that night, one of Daniel's finally opened. It happened after midnight. The babies were asleep in pieces the way they often were now. Noah in his crib, one hand resting near his cheek. Lily against Daniel's chest in the rocking chair. Caleb breathing heavily after a long fight against sleep. Rose tucked in Helen's arms while the older woman hummed low and off-key. Grace sat on the floor near the window sorting clean burp cloths into a basket. The room was quiet enough for thoughts. That was when Daniel said it. I wasn't there when she died. Grace stopped folding. Helen's humming faded. Daniel kept his eyes on Lily. The baby slept under his chin, warm and small, unaware that her father had stepped into a memory that still had teeth. I was in Chicago, he said. A meeting. A stupid meeting. No one moved. Outside, wind brushed the trees against the glass. Daniel's voice stayed low, but each word sounded pulled from somewhere deep. The doctor said she was stable. They told me there was no reason to cancel. Emily told me to go. She said, close the deal and come home smug so I can make fun of you. A broken smile crossed his face and vanished. So I went. Grace did not tell him it wasn't his fault. Not yet. Easy comfort can become another kind of silence. Daniel stared at the sleeping baby. The call came during dinner. I remember the waiter placing a steak in front of me. Medium rare. I remember that because I hate myself for remembering it. Helen's eyes filled. Daniel's jaw tightened. They said there were complications. Bleeding. Pressure dropping. Words I knew but did not understand fast enough. I got on the first flight back. He swallowed. By the time I arrived, she was gone. The nursery seemed to grow smaller. Daniel's hand trembled against Lily's back. They let me see her. She looked like she was sleeping. Everyone says that. It's not true. She looked gone. Grace lowered her eyes. Daniel's voice cracked. And then they took me to the NICU. 4 incubators. 4 babies. So small. So alive. He let out a breath that shook. I remember standing there thinking I should feel grateful. They survived. I should feel grateful. He looked up at Grace. But all I could think was she didn't. No one spoke. No one should have. Daniel looked back at Lily. Then I hated myself for that too. Lily stirred against him. Daniel froze, then placed his palm gently over her back the way Grace had taught him. I'm here, he whispered automatically. The baby settled. That simple motion undid him. His eyes filled, and this time he did not hide it. I brought them home and everyone kept saying how blessed I was. 4 beautiful babies. A miracle. And they are. God, they are. His voice broke. But every time I looked at them I saw the room she never came home to. I saw the chair she never used. I saw 4 lives beginning where hers ended. Grace's face tightened with compassion. Now she understood more clearly. Daniel had not only been avoiding the baby's grief, he had been afraid of his own love for them because it was tangled with the moment he lost Emily. He looked at Grace with wet eyes. What kind of father thinks that? A grieving one, Grace said. The answer came softly. No judgment. No decoration. Just truth. Daniel closed his eyes. I thought if I stayed busy it would pass. If I kept the house running, if I hired the right people, if I made sure they were fed and clean and safe, maybe one day I would look at them and not feel the hospital. Grace moved closer but did not touch him. And did it pass? Daniel shook his head. No. It got louder. From her chair, Helen whispered, grief does that when it has nowhere to go. Daniel looked at her. Helen wiped her cheek. I lost my husband 9 years ago. For 6 months I kept his shoes by the door because moving them felt like killing him again. The room was still. Daniel had known Helen for years. He had never known that. Helen looked toward the babies. One day I tripped over them and sat on the floor crying for an hour. Not because of the shoes. Because I finally understood he was not coming back to wear them. Daniel's face softened with a pain that recognized pain. Grace said, quietly. And what helped? Helen gave a small sad smile. Saying his name without apologizing for it. Daniel looked down. Emily? The name that had become both wound and medicine. Grace reached for a folded blanket and placed it beside her. Mr. Whitmore, your children are not the reason Emily is gone. Daniel flinched. Grace saw it. She continued carefully. And loving them does not mean you are accepting her death as fair. Daniel's breathing changed. That was the hidden fear. The one he had not said even to himself. If he let himself fully love the life in his arms, was he betraying the life he lost? Grace held his gaze. You can be grateful they lived and devastated that she didn't. Both can be true. Daniel's shoulders folded inward. Not dramatically. Just enough to show the weight shifting. I don't know how to carry both. No one does at first. That's not an answer. No, Grace said. It's a beginning. Lily moved in his arms again, her little mouth searching. Daniel adjusted her gently. A month ago he would have panicked at the smallest movement. Now his hands knew where to go. He noticed that. So did Grace. You are already carrying more than you think, she said. Daniel looked at his daughter. For the first time he did not see only Emily's absence. He saw Lily. Her tiny nose. Her stubborn brow. her fingers gripping his shirt like she had chosen him for the night and expected him to stay. He looked at Noah. Small sensitive Noah who searched for touch before crying. Caleb who fought sleep like surrender was dangerous. Rose who needed quiet more than motion. They were not just reminders of a death. They were themselves. Emily's children. His children. Living. Breathing. Asking him to meet them here, not in the hospital memory he kept returning to. Daniel lowered his face and kissed Lily's head. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Grace watched. Daniel continued, voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, I kept looking at you through the worst day of my life." Helen began to cry again silently. Daniel looked at each crib. "All of you." Noah slept on. Caleb hid. Rose shifted in Helen's arms. Lily rested against his heart. Daniel looked up at Grace. "I love them." Grace's expression softened. "I know." "No," he said, shaking his head. "I mean, I love them. Not because I'm supposed to, not because they're Emily's, not because everyone says they're a miracle." He looked down at Lily. "I love them." The words changed him as he said them. They did not erase the grief. They did not bring Emily back. But they separated love from guilt. Just enough. Grace sat back on her heels. "Then tell them tomorrow. And the next day. And the next night when they cry." Daniel gave a broken laugh. "They won't understand." Grace smiled gently. "They will feel it." Later near 3:00 a.m., Grace asked Daniel to bring out one of Emily's sweaters. He hesitated at the bedroom door for almost a full minute. Then he entered. The room was dark. Her side of the bed was still perfectly made. Her book sat on the nightstand with a bookmark halfway through. For months Daniel had passed through this room like a thief, taking only what he needed and leaving quickly before memory saw him. Tonight he opened the closet. The smell hit first. Lavender. Vanilla. Emily. His knees almost gave. He gripped the door frame and breathed through it. No one rushed him. No one called from the hallway. He chose a soft cream sweater, the one Emily wore on quiet Sundays. He held it against his chest for a second, then carried it back to the nursery. Grace did not take it from him. She nodded toward the cribs. "You do it." Daniel placed the sweater over the arm of the blue rocking chair. Not in a crib. Not close enough to risk safety. Just nearby. A presence. A memory made visible. The room seemed to warm around it. Daniel sat down in the chair with Rose now in his arms. He looked at the sweater, then at his daughter. "That was your mom's," he whispered. "She wore it when she made pancakes and burned the first batch every time." Helen laughed softly. Grace smiled. Rose blinked up at him. Daniel kept talking. For 20 minutes he told stories. Small ones. Emily dancing barefoot in the kitchen. Emily crying during dog food commercials. Emily insisting the babies would all have different personalities, and Daniel arguing that newborns mostly looked like angry potatoes. Grace laughed at that. Helen laughed harder. And Rose fell asleep while her father spoke of her mother, not like a tragedy but like a woman who had lived. That night Grace did not only help the babies. She helped Daniel find the door back to himself. Not the old Daniel. That man was gone. But a new one. A father who could grieve and still laugh. A widower who could miss his wife and still love his children without guilt. A man who had finally stopped asking money to do the work only the heart could do. By dawn the babies had slept in stretches longer than before. Not perfect. But real. Daniel stood at the nursery window as pale light spread over the lawn. Behind him, Emily's cream sweater rested over the rocking chair. In the cribs, 4 small lives breathed quietly. Grace came to stand beside him. He did not look at her when he spoke. "You were right." "About what?" "I needed help too." Grace said nothing. Daniel's eyes stayed on the morning. "I thought you were here to teach me how to calm them." Grace's voice was gentle. "I think they were teaching you too." Daniel turned then and looked at his children. For the first time, he did not feel only fear. He felt sorrow. Love. Exhaustion. Hope. All tangled together. All true. And for once he did not try to untangle them before holding them. He simply stood there, breathing in the quiet while the house behind him held Emily's name without breaking. On the 14th night, Daniel Whitmore made his first real mistake without trying to hide it. That may not sound like progress. But in that house it was. The evening had started well. Too well. Noah had taken his bottle without crying. Lily had fallen asleep in Daniel's arms before midnight. Caleb had fussed for only 6 minutes before settling against the sound of Daniel's voice. Rose had rested quietly in the blue rocking chair while Helen folded laundry beside her. Grace arrived at 10 and found the nursery calm. Daniel looked almost proud. Not arrogant. Just relieved. The kind of relief that makes a man think, maybe I finally understand this. Grace saw it on his face and said nothing. She only washed her hands, checked each baby with her eyes, and sat near the window. For 2 hours the house held. Daniel moved through the nursery with a new confidence. He warmed bottles before the babies reached full hunger. He spoke Emily's name without choking on it. He placed his hand on Caleb's chest and waited until the baby's breathing slowed. Helen watched him from the doorway and smiled. "You're getting good at this," she whispered. Daniel looked down at Noah sleeping against his shoulder. "For tonight," he said. But inside a dangerous little voice whispered something else. "Maybe I don't need as much help now." It was not pride exactly. It was hope wearing pride's coat. After so many weeks of feeling useless, Daniel wanted one night where he was enough. One night where the babies chose him. One night where Grace could sit back and see that he had learned. At 1:27 a.m., Lily woke. Not softly. Not gradually. She screamed. Her whole body stiffened, her face turning red in seconds. The sound tore through the nursery and hit the other 3 cribs like a match dropped in dry grass. Noah startled awake. Caleb began crying. Rose's little rasp followed. All 4. Again. Daniel stood from the rocking chair too quickly. "It's all right," he said. "I've got her." Grace rose from the floor. "Daniel. I've got her." The words came out sharp. The room changed. Grace stopped. Helen looked at him. Daniel heard his own tone, but he was already moving too fast to pull it back. He lifted Lily, bounced her once, then twice. Too hard. Not dangerous but rushed. Her cry sharpened. He turned toward the bottle warmer. "She's hungry." Grace spoke quietly. "She ate 40 minutes ago." Then gas. "Maybe. Slow down. I know what I'm doing." The words landed badly. Everyone heard them. Even Daniel. Especially Daniel. Lily screamed against his chest. Caleb kicked in his crib. Noah cried with that panicked little sound Daniel had learned meant fear. Rose's face crumpled, her hoarse cry barely strong enough to rise above the others. Daniel's heart pounded. The old pressure returned. The need to solve. To prove. To make the crying stop before it exposed him again. He shifted Lily to his shoulder and patted her back. Too fast. Grace stepped closer. "Daniel, pause." He turned on her. "Please don't correct everything I do." The room went still beneath the crying. Grace did not defend herself. That made it worse. Daniel saw Helen's face. Not angry. Sad. And suddenly he heard what he had really said. Not, "Don't correct me. Don't let me feel helpless again." Lily's cry broke into a sob. Her tiny hands pushed against his shirt. Daniel froze. His confidence drained out of him all at once. He was not calm. He was not leading. He was not helping. He was performing fatherhood for the one person who had taught him what it meant. His shoulders dropped. "I'm sorry," he said. Grace's expression softened, but she did not move yet. Daniel looked at Lily, then at Noah, Caleb, and Rose. "I'm sorry," he repeated quieter. "I got scared." Grace nodded once. Not as approval. As recognition. "Put your feet on the floor," she said. He looked down. He was standing stiff, one heel lifted, body ready to run. He lowered both feet. "Breathe before you touch her back again." Daniel breathed. Once. Twice. Lily still cried. The others still cried. Nothing fixed itself because he apologized. But something in him stopped fighting. Grace stepped beside him. "May I help?" The question was gentle. It also humbled him more than any criticism could have. "May I help?" Not move aside. Not "You're doing it wrong." Help. Daniel nodded. Yes. One word. Harder than any deal he had ever signed. Grace placed one hand lightly on Lily's back over Daniel's hand. "Slower," she whispered. Together they changed the rhythm. Not Grace taking over. Not Daniel pretending he had control. Together. Lily's crying stayed sharp for several seconds, then began to break into smaller pieces. Helen moved to Noah's crib and rested a hand on his chest. "I hear you, little one," she murmured. Daniel glanced toward her. Helen nodded. No judgment. Only help. That nearly undid him. For months Daniel had believed good fatherhood meant becoming the person who could handle everything. The bottles, the doctors, the grief, the schedules, the house, the company, the babies, his own breaking heart. He thought needing help meant he was failing Emily. But standing there in the yellow nursery light with Grace's hand over his and Helen calming Noah across the room, he began to understand something that should have been simple. Children do not need a father who never needs anyone. They need a father who will not let pride stand between them and comfort. Lily softened against him. Not asleep. Not calm. But no longer fighting his arms. Grace removed her hand. "You have her," she said. Daniel looked down. Lily's cheek was pressed against his shirt. Her little breath hitched. Her fingers opened and closed once, then rested. He whispered, "I have you." His voice cracked. "And when I don't know how, I'll ask." Grace's eyes glistened. Helen looked away, pretending to adjust Noah's blanket. Daniel sat carefully in the blue rocking chair with Lily against his chest. The chair creaked. Emily's cream sweater still rested over the arm, soft in the lamplight. He looked at it and spoke, not loudly but clearly enough for the room to hear. "Your mom would have asked for help too, wouldn't she?" No one answered. Then Helen gave a small laugh through her tears. "Oh, she would have demanded it." Daniel smiled. "She would have made a list." "A long one," Helen said. Grace sat on the rug beside Caleb's crib. "With headings," Daniel added. Helen laughed again. The sound moved through the nursery like a window opening. Lily's breathing steadied. Noah quieted under Helen's hand. Caleb whimpered until Grace began speaking to him about the moon outside his window. Rose, still upset, needed Daniel next. He passed Lily to Helen and lifted Rose carefully, slower this time. No performance. No rush. No proving. Just a father learning to receive the help already in the room. At 2:15 a.m., all 4 babies were still awake. But the crisis had passed. They lay or rested in different arms, surrounded by adults who were no longer trying to outsmart the night. Daniel sat on the floor back against the blue chair, Rose tucked against him. Grace sat nearby with Caleb. Helen held Lily and watched Noah sleep in his crib. For a while nobody spoke. Then Daniel said, "I thought being their father meant I had to know what to do." Grace looked at him. "And now?" Daniel looked down at Rose. "Now, I think it means staying close while I learn." Grace smiled faintly. "That is closer to the truth." He took a breath. "And letting people help." Helen's voice was soft from across the room. "That may be the hardest part for you." Daniel laughed under his breath. "It is." Rose shifted against him. He rested one hand gently over her back. "I kept thinking Emily trusted me with them," he said. "So I had to be enough." Grace's face changed at that. "Maybe she trusted you to love them," she said. "Not to do it alone." Daniel closed his eyes. The words found a place inside him that had been locked for months. Not to do it alone. He had imagined Emily watching him from somewhere, disappointed by every failure. Every nanny who quit. Every doctor visit with no answer. Every night he lost patience. Every moment he stood outside the nursery, afraid to go in. But maybe love did not demand perfection from the living. Maybe Emily, if she could see him now, would not be asking why he had needed Grace. Maybe she would be grateful someone came. Maybe she would be grateful he finally opened the door. Near dawn, Grace prepared to leave. The babies were asleep again, each one settled in a different kind of peace. Not deep. Not guaranteed. But real enough for morning. Daniel walked her downstairs. The foyer was blue with early light. For once he did not look like a man waiting for disaster. He looked tired, humbled, and strangely lighter. At the door, Grace put on her coat. Daniel opened his mouth, then stopped. Grace waited. Finally he said, "I was rude tonight." "You were scared." "That doesn't excuse it." "No," she said. "It explains it." He nodded. "I don't want to become the kind of man who pushes help away because he's ashamed he needs it." Grace looked at him for a long moment. "Then don't." "Simple. Sharp. Merciful." Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "You make everything sound possible." "No," Grace said. "I make it sound practiced." That stayed with him. After she left, Daniel returned upstairs. The nursery was quiet. Helen had fallen asleep in the chair. Emily's sweater lay beside her. The babies breathed softly in their cribs. Daniel stood in the doorway and understood that fatherhood was not a title he had received the day they were born. It was something he would have to practice. At Traynol A.M. At noon. During fevers. During first steps. During questions he could not answer. During birthdays Emily would miss. During every ordinary day when grief might return through a song, a smell, a face, a laugh. He would not always know what to do. He would fail again. He would speak too sharply again. He would panic again. But he would ask. He would learn. He would stay. No one had asked him to be perfect. No one had thanked him for trying. He just had to keep showing up. Daniel walked to each crib and placed a hand gently near each child. "Noah. Lily. Caleb. Rose. I don't have every answer," he whispered. "But I'm here." The words were not dramatic. They did not make him a hero. They made him a father. And for the first time that felt like enough to begin. By sunrise, Daniel stood in the nursery doorway and listened. Not to crying. To breathing. 4 tiny breaths. 4 little lives. 4 hearts that had not needed a perfect father, only a present one. Grace was gone for the morning. Helen was asleep in the chair. Emily's cream sweater still rested over the blue rocker, soft in the first light. Daniel walked to each crib and whispered their names. Noah. Lily. Caleb. Rose. Then he added the name he no longer feared. Emily. The house did not break. It healed a little. Daniel finally understood what money had never taught him. Love is not control, healing is not silence. And grief does not disappear because we refuse to speak its name. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not cured by experts, machines, or perfect plans. Sometimes they begin to heal when one person sits close, listens without fear, and says, "You are not alone." That was Grace's gift. Not magic. Not a trick. Presence. True presence. And from that day on, when the babies cried, Daniel no longer heard failure. He heard a call. A call to come closer. A call to love better. A call to stay. In real life, the people we love do not always need us to fix their pain. Sometimes they need us to stop running from it. To sit beside them, to say the hard name, to hold the trembling hand. To stay when staying hurts. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. Who was the person who stayed with you when life broke you? And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story may remind someone that hope is still alive.